In a fog-draped London, Sherlock Holmes receives a cryptic plea from Dr. Elias Thorne, a reclusive scientist claiming a phenomenon that defies physics. At Thorne Manor, Holmes and Watson witness objects moving without touch, glowing apparitions, and a vanishing prototype in a locked room. As they unravel coded notes, hidden tunnels, and staged illusions, Holmes suspects a conspiracy blending science and deception. A thrilling chase through Dartmoor's moors exposes Thorne's brother as the mastermind, using holograms and magnetic trickery for greed. With reason as his weapon, Holmes restores order, proving science triumphs over fear in this electrifying mystery. Chapter 1. The enigmatic invitation. The fog clung to the streets of London like a shroud, muffling the clatter of hooves and the cries of street vendors as Sherlock Holmes sat by the fire in his Baker Street lodgings. The room, cluttered with books, chemical apparatus, and the faint scent of tobacco, was a haven of ordered chaos. John Watson, his loyal companion, reclined in an armchair, skimming the morning's Times with a distracted air. The gas lamps cast long shadows, their flickering light dancing across the walls, as the city outside seemed to hold its breath in the November chill of 1895. Holmes, as was his habit, was engrossed in a chemical experiment, his long fingers manipulating a pipette with surgical precision. A beaker bubbled gently on the table, emitting a faint, acrid vapor. Watson glanced up, his brow furrowing at the sight of his friend's intense concentration. "Holmes," he ventured, "surely you've tortured that solution enough for one morning." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile, though his eyes remained fixed on the beaker. "Patience, Watson. Science demands precision, not haste. This compound may yet yield answers to a question that has vexed me for weeks." Watson sighed, accustomed to Holmes's cryptic replies. He returned to his newspaper, but his attention was soon drawn to a sharp rap at the door. Mrs. Hudson, their landlady, entered, her face a mixture of curiosity and mild exasperation. In her hand was an envelope, its edges worn and smudged as though it had traveled a great distance. "A letter for you, Mr. Holmes," she said, handing it over with a pointed look. "Delivered by a queer sort of fellow wouldn't give his name, and he was off before I could ask more." Holmes took the envelope, his interest piqued. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson." As she retreated, he examined the letter with the scrutiny of a jeweler inspecting a rare gem. The paper was thick, almost parchment-like, with a faint watermark of a crescent moon. The handwriting was precise, yet hurried, as though written under duress. The seal, a deep crimson wax, bore no crest or insignia, only a curious spiral pattern. Watson leaned forward, his curiosity now fully roused. "What is it, Holmes? Another of your mysterious correspondence?" Holmes sliced open the envelope. With a letter opener, his movements swift and deliberate, he unfolded the single sheet within and read aloud, his voice low and measured. "My dear Mr. Holmes, I write to you in a state of utmost urgency, though I fear my words may seem the ravings of a madman. My name is Dr. Elias Thorne, a man of science, though my recent endeavors have led me to question the very foundations of that discipline. I have encountered a phenomenon that defies all known laws of physics, a matter so extraordinary that I dare not entrust it to any but the keenest mind. I implore you to come to my estate, Thorne Manor, in the wilds of Dartmoor. Time is of the essence, for I fear forces are at work that may soon spiral beyond my control. Bring your associate, Dr. Watson, if you will, for his steady hand may prove invaluable. I await you with hope and trepidation, yours in desperation." Dr. Elias Thorne Holmes's eyes gleamed as he folded the letter and placed it on the table. "Intriguing," he murmured, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Most intriguing indeed." Watson frowned, setting aside his newspaper. "Dartmoor, that's a desolate place for a scientist to hole up. And this talk of defying physics, what could he mean? Sounds like a case for a conjurer, not a detective." Holmes's smile widened, a glint of amusement in his gray eyes. On the contrary, Watson, when a man of science claims the impossible, it is either a breakthrough of monumental proportions or a delusion born of error. Either way, it merits investigation. Dr. Thorne is no obscure dabbler. His name is known, though sparingly, in academic circles. A recluse, yes, but one whose papers on electromagnetic theory have stirred debate among the Royal Society. Watson raised an eyebrow. You know of him? I make it my business to know of those who push the boundaries of knowledge, Holmes replied, rising from his chair with a restless energy. Thorne's work, though esoteric, has been praised for its rigor. If he claims to have stumbled upon something that challenges the laws of physics, I am inclined to take him seriously at least until proven otherwise. He crossed to a bookshelf, pulling down a worn volume of scientific journals. Flippin' through the pages, he paused at an article titled On the Manipulation of Electromagnetic Fields in Controlled Environments. Here, he said, tapping the page. Thorne's work, published 3 years ago. Dense, but promising. He theorized a method of harnessing electromagnetic forces to influence physical objects at a distance. The scientific community dismissed it as speculative, but, he trailed off, his mind clearly racing. Watson leaned over to glance at the article, though the dense equations and technical jargon were largely impenetrable to him. So, what's your next step? Shall we pack? For Dartmoor. Holmes's gaze flicked to the window, where the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. We shall, Watson. But first, I must make inquiries. A man like Thorne does not summon Sherlock Holmes lightly. There may be more to this than a mere scientific anomaly. The next hour saw Holmes dispatching telegrams to various contacts, inquiries to the Royal Society, a colleague at the British Museum, and even a cryptic message to an unnamed source in Whitehall. Watson, accustomed to Holmes's methods, busied himself with packing a small valise, including his revolver and medical kit. Sensing that this case might demand more than intellectual prowess, by noon, replies began to arrive. The Royal Society confirmed Thorne's reputation as a brilliant but eccentric figure, recently withdrawn from public life. The British Museum offered little, save a passing reference to Thorne's interest in ancient artifacts linked to early electrical experiments. The Whitehall contact, however, provided a tantalizing clue. Thorne had recently sought government funding for a project deemed too radical to support. Though the details were classified, Holmes paced the room, his lean frame taut with anticipation. A scientist of Thorne's caliber, isolated in Dartmoor, requesting my aid for a phenomenon he cannot explain, and now whispers of a rejected project. This is no ordinary matter, Watson. We must prepare for the unexpected. The journey to Dartmoor was arranged with characteristic efficiency. A late afternoon train from Paddington would carry them to Exeter, where a hired carriage would take them to Thorne Manor, a sprawling estate nestled in the rugged moors. As they boarded the train, the fog had lifted, revealing a sky of slate-gray clouds that promised rain. Watson, ever the soldier, felt a familiar prickle of unease, as though the moors themselves were watching. The train rattled through the countryside, its rhythm lulling Watson into a doze, while Holmes remained alert, his eyes scanning a map of Dartmoor. Thorne Manor lies near Grimpen Mire, he noted, his voice barely audible over the clack of the wheels. A treacherous place, Watson. Bogs that can swallow a man whole, and legends of spectral hounds to chill the blood of the superstitious. Watson stirred, rubbing his eyes. You don't believe in such nonsense, surely? Holmes's lips quirked. I believe in what can be observed and deduced. But legends often cloak truths, however distorted. Thorne's letter suggests something tangible, yet extraordinary. We shall see what truths lie beneath his claims. Night had fallen by the time they reached Exeter, where a dour coachman awaited with a carriage. The road to Thorne Manor was little more than a rutted track, winding through heather and granite outcrops. The air grew colder, the wind carrying the faint howl of the moors. Watson pulled his coat tighter, his breath visible in the lanterns. Glow-dotted last, the carriage crested a rise, and Thorn Manor came into view, hulking silhouette against the moonless sky. Its towers and gables loomed like the bones of some ancient beast, its windows flickering with the faint light of gas lamps. The estate was surrounded by a high stone wall, its iron gates rusted but formidable. As the carriage halted, the gates creaked open, revealing a figure cloaked in shadow. The man stepped forward, his face illuminated by the lantern, a gaunt, middle-aged figure with deep-set eyes and a nervous demeanor. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I am Dr. Elias Thorne. Thank God you've come." Holmes stepped down, his gaze sweeping over Thorne with the intensity of a hawk. "Your letter spoke of urgency, Dr. Thorne. Pray, tell us what phenomenon has so shaken your scientific convictions." Thorne hesitated, glancing at the darkened manor behind him. "Not here," he whispered. "Inside. There are things you must see for yourself, things I cannot explain." Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes, sensing the weight of the moment. The manor's doors yawned open, swallowing them into its depths as the wind howled across the moors. The interior of Thorne Manor was as imposing as its exterior. The entrance hall was vast, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow the newcomers. A grand staircase spiraled upward, flanked by suits of armor that gleamed dully in the lamplight. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax, tinged with something metallic, almost electric. Thorne led them to a drawing room, where a fire crackled in a massive hearth. The room was cluttered with scientific instruments, brass telescopes, barometers, and a curious device that resembled a gyroscope, its components etched with strange symbols. A large table bore maps, charts, and papers covered in equations, some scribbled over in frantic haste. "Please, sit," Thorne said, gesturing to a pair of high-backed chairs. His hands trembled as he poured brandy from a decanter, spilling a few drops. "Forgive my state. I have not slept in days." Holmes remained standing, his eyes roving over the room. "Your letter mentioned a phenomenon that defies physics. Describe it, precisely." Thorne swallowed, setting down the decanter. "It began 3 weeks ago. I was conducting experiments in my laboratory, attempts to manipulate electromagnetic fields to achieve unconventional effects. At first, the results were promising. Small objects, coins, pens moved slightly, as if nudged by an unseen force. But then," he paused, his eyes darting to the shadows, "things changed. Objects began to move without my intervention. Books fell from shelves, glass shattered without cause. And then, 2 nights ago, I saw something." Watson leaned forward, his medical instincts alert to Thorne's agitation. "What did you see, man?" Thorne's voice dropped to a whisper. "A shape, not human, not animal, a distortion in the air, like heat rising from a fire, but cold. It moved through the laboratory, and where it passed, instruments went wild, needles spun, lights flickered. I thought I was mad, but my assistants saw it too." Holmes's expression remained impassive, though his eyes burned with interest. "And this phenomenon, has it occurred since?" "Every night," Thorne replied, his voice breaking. "Always at midnight, always in the laboratory. I've tried to document it, but my instruments fail. My notes, they vanish, or the words change. I am a man of science, Mr. Holmes, but this feels like something beyond reason." Holmes paced slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of a chart. "Reason is never beyond reach, Dr. Thorne. What of your assistants, your household, any enemies who might wish to discredit you?" Thorne shook his head. "My assistants are loyal, though shaken. My family, my brother, Cedric, and my niece, Eleanor, live here, but they are not involved in my work. As for enemies, my theories have made me a pariah in some circles, but none would stoop to this. Watson frowned, glancing at Holmes. Could it be a prank? Some clever trick to unsettle you? Thorne's laugh was bitter. If it is a trick beyond any I've seen. The objects move without wires, without magnets. The air itself seems to bend. Holmes stopped pacing, his gaze locking onto Thorne's. Show me this laboratory, now. The laboratory was a cavernous space beneath the manor, reached by a winding staircase that descended into darkness. The air grew colder as they approached, the walls damp with condensation. Gas lamps hissed, casting a sickly yellow glow over a maze of tables, wires, and strange devices. A Tesla coil stood in one corner, its glass tubes glinting ominously. Shelves groaned under the weight of books, jars of chemicals, and peculiar artifacts, ancient-looking amulets, etched stones, and a brass orrery that spun slowly of its own. A cord. Thorne gestured to a table at the center, where a small, metallic sphere rested on a velvet cushion. This is the heart of my experiments, he said. A prototype designed to channel electromagnetic energy in ways previously thought impossible. It was meant to be my legacy. Holmes examined the sphere, his fingers hovering just above its surface. And this is what triggers the phenomenon. I believe so, Thorne said. Or rather, it amplifies something already present. I cannot explain it fully, but the effects began after I activated it. Watson, ever pragmatic, ran his hand along a nearby shelf, checking for hidden mechanisms. Holmes, could this be some elaborate hoax? Magnets, perhaps, or concealed springs. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he studied the room. Possible, but unlikely. The precision required to move objects without visible means, in a space this large, would demand engineering far beyond the ordinary. No, Watson, this is either a genuine anomaly or a deception of extraordinary cunning. As if on cue, the gas lamps flickered, their flames dipping low. A low hum filled the air, like the vibration of a tuning fork. Watson's hand went to his revolver, his soldier's instincts flaring. Thorne's face paled, and he pointed to a corner of the room. There, look. A faint shimmer appeared, like a ripple in water, hovering a foot above the floor. It pulsed, growing brighter, then dimmer, as though struggling to take form. The air grew colder, the hum louder. A book on a nearby shelf trembled, then slid to the floor with a thud. Watson's breath caught, his rational mind grappling with the sight. Holmes, however, stepped forward, his expression one of intense focus. He raised a hand, as if testing the air, then swiftly drew a small magnifying glass from his pocket. Fascinating, he murmured, peering through the lens. No heat, no visible distortion of light, yet the effect is undeniable. The shimmer vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the room in eerie silence. The lamps flared back to life, and the hum ceased. Thorne sank into a chair, his hands shaking. You see, it defies explanation. Holmes pocketed his magnifying glass, his mind clearly racing. Not yet, Dr. Thorne, but every phenomenon has a cause, and I intend to find it. Watson, we shall remain here tonight. I wish to observe this occurrence at midnight. Watson nodded, though his unease lingered. And if it's dangerous? Holmes's smile was grim. Then we shall face it with reason as our shield. Come, Watson, the game is afoot. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. Holmes interrogated Thorne's assistants, a nervous young man named Harold Finch, and a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Cole, both of whom confirmed the strange events, but offered little insight. Thorne's brother, Cedric, a dour man with a limp, greeted them with barely concealed hostility, while his niece, Eleanor, a pale young woman with an air of quiet defiance, seemed more curious than afraid. Dinner was a tense affair, The manor's dining room, a cavern of shadows and heavy silences. Cedric muttered about the expense of maintaining the estate, while Eleanor spoke vaguely of her uncle's work, her eyes flicking to Holmes with a mix of hope and suspicion. Thorne himself ate little, his gaze fixed on the clock as midnight approached. As the hour drew near, Holmes and Watson returned to the laboratory, joined by Thorne and his assistants. The air was thick with anticipation, the gas lamps casting long shadows across the cluttered space. Holmes had set up a series of instruments, thermometers, barometers, and a small galvanometer to measure any changes in the environment. Watson stood by the door, his revolver at the ready, though he felt faintly ridiculous, preparing for an enemy he could not name. At the stroke of midnight, the lamps flickered again. The hum returned, louder this time, accompanied by a faint crackle, like static electricity. The metallic sphere on the table began to vibrate, its surface gleaming unnaturally. Then, before their eyes, a glass beaker slid across the table, stopping just short of the edge. A stack of papers lifted, fluttering as though caught in a breeze, though the air was still. Watson's heart pounded, his grip tightening on his revolver. Thorne whispered something unintelligible, his eyes wide with fear. But Holmes remained calm, his gaze darting from the sphere to the instruments. "Note the galvanometer," he said sharply. A surge in electromagnetic activity. The shimmer appeared again, larger this time, coalescing into a vague, humanoid shape. It hovered near the Tesla coil, its edges blurring as though made of smoke. Watson took a step forward, then froze as the shape turned toward him. For a moment, he thought he saw ice-cold, unblinking eyes staring from the haze. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon ceased. The lamps steadied, the hum faded, and the sphere grew still. The papers settled back onto the table, and the laboratory was silent once more. Holmes exhaled slowly, his mind already dissecting the event. "Remarkable," he said, almost to himself. "A controlled effect, yet not entirely predictable. Dr. Thorne, I shall need access to your journals, all of them. And Watson, tomorrow we begin a thorough search of this manor. Something, or someone, is orchestrating this display." Thorne nodded, his face ashen. "You have my full cooperation, Mr. Holmes, but I beg you find the truth before it consumes us all." As they ascended the staircase to their rooms, Watson couldn't shake the image of those ghostly eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of the unknown pressing against his rational mind. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, his steps light and his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. "Sleep well, Watson," he said as they parted at their doors. "Tomorrow, we unravel the enigma of Thorne Manor." But sleep eluded Watson. That night, his dreams haunted by shadows that moved without cause, and eyes that watched from beyond the veil of reason. Chapter 2. Arrival at Thorne Manor. The train rattled through the mist-laden countryside, its rhythmic clatter a steady counterpoint to the silence that hung between Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson. The letter from Dr. Elias Thorne, its cryptic urgency still fresh in their minds, had drawn them from the familiar bustle of Baker Street to this remote corner of England. Outside the window, rolling hills gave way to dense, shadowed woods, their branches clawing at the sky as if guarding secrets of their own. Holmes sat with his hands steepled, his sharp eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the glass, while Watson, ever the observer, noted the faintest crease of anticipation in his companion's otherwise impassive face. "It's unlike you to be so quiet before a case," Watson remarked, breaking the silence. He adjusted his overcoat, the chill of the compartment seeping through, despite the scarf wound tightly around his neck. "This letter from Thorne, do you make anything of it yet?" Holmes's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Enough to— No, it's no ordinary matter, Watson." Dr. Thorne's words were chosen with care, yet they betray a mind teetering on the edge of desperation. "He speaks of a phenomenon that defies physics, Yet he is a man of science. That alone intrigues me. Men of his ilk do not lightly admit to the impossible. Watson nodded, recalling the letter's peculiar phrasing. A force beyond my understanding moves within these walls. I fear I have unlocked something I cannot contain. The words had carried a weight that lingered, like the echo of a warning bell. He glanced at Holmes, whose gaze had not wavered. Do you think he's mad, or perhaps exaggerating to lure you out here? Madness is a possibility, Holmes replied, his tone measured. But exaggeration? No. The man's reputation precedes him, reclusive, brilliant, and not prone to theatrics. If he claims to have witnessed the impossible, I suspect he believes it. Whether his belief is grounded in fact or delusion remains to be seen. The train slowed, its whistle piercing the fog as it approached a small, weathered station. The sign read Thorne's Crossing, though the paint was peeling, and the platform was deserted, save for a lone porter who barely glanced up from his newspaper. Holmes and Watson disembarked, their boots echoing on the wooden planks. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the fog clung to the ground like a living thing, curling around their ankles as they made their way to a waiting carriage. The driver, a stooped man with a face like crumpled leather, tipped his cap but said little. To Thorne Manor, sirs? He asked, his voice rough as gravel. Holmes nodded, and they climbed aboard. The carriage lurched forward, the horses' hooves muffled by the soft earth of the narrow road. Watson peered out, but the fog obscured all but the vague outlines of gnarled trees and the occasional glint of a distant light. This place feels forsaken, he muttered. Hardly the setting for a man of science. Precisely why it suits Dr. Thorne, Holmes replied. Isolation fosters focus, Watson. A mind like his thrives where distractions are few. But isolation can also breed peculiarities. The journey stretched on, the road winding through a landscape that seemed to grow wilder with each passing mile. At last, the carriage crested a hill, and Thorne Manor came into view, a sprawling, Gothic edifice of gray stone, its towers and turrets piercing the fog like the bones of some ancient beast. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows glowed faintly, as if reluctant to reveal what lay within. Watson felt a prickle of unease, though he dismissed it as the effect of the dismal weather. The carriage halted before a set of iron gates, their intricate filigree rusted but imposing. A footman, clad in a livery that seemed a size too large, emerged from the shadows to open them. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously as he waved them through. "Dr. Thorne's expecting you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mind the steps, sirs. They're slick." Holmes's gaze lingered on the footman for a moment before he strode forward, his long coat billowing in the wind. Watson followed, his medical bag slung over his shoulder, its familiar weight a small comfort against the manor's looming presence. The front door, a massive slab of oak carved with geometric patterns, creaked open to reveal a dimly lit hall. The air inside was stale, tinged with the faint metallic temps of chemicals and the musty scent of old books. A figure emerged from the gloom, a tall, gaunt man with a shock of white hair and eyes that gleamed with a feverish intensity. Dr. Elias, Thorne Watson presumed, though the man bore little resemblance to the composed scientist he had imagined. Thorne's hands trembled as he extended them in greeting, and his voice, when he spoke, was hoarse, as if strained by hours of shouting or whispering. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Thorne said, his words tumbling out too quickly. "Thank you for coming. I scarcely know where to begin. The things I've seen, they defy reason, yet they are real, too real." Holmes's eyes narrowed, taking in every detail of the man before him, the ink stains on his fingers, the faint tremor in his jaw, the way his gaze flicked toward the shadows as if expecting something to emerge. "Calm yourself, Dr. Thorne," Holmes said, his tone steady but firm. "Begin at the beginning. Tell me precisely what has occurred." Thorn nodded, though his agitation remained evident. "Come," he said, gesturing toward a grand staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. "I'll show you to your rooms first. You'll need rest after your journey, but tonight, you may see it for yourselves." Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes, who gave a slight nod, as if to say, "Patience, Watson. All will be revealed." They followed Thorn up the staircase, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. The manor seemed to pulse with a strange energy, its walls adorned with faded tapestries and portraits, whose eyes seemed to follow them. Watson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though he attributed it to the oppressive atmosphere. Their rooms were on the second floor, overlooking a courtyard shrouded in mist. The furnishings were old but well kept, with heavy drapes and a fireplace that crackled weakly, doing little to dispel the chill. Thorn lingered at the door, wringing his hands. "Dinner will be served at 7, he said. "Afterward, I'll take you to the laboratory. That's where it happens." "What, precisely, is it?" Holmes asked, his tone deceptively mild. Thorn hesitated, his eyes darting to the window as if expecting to see something there. "Objects," he said at last. "They move. Without touch, without cause. A book falls from a shelf. A glass slides across a table. And sometimes, there's a sound. A hum, like nothing I've ever heard. It's not natural, Mr. Holmes. It's not right." Holmes's expression remained unreadable, but Watson could sense the gears turning in his friend's mind. "We shall see," Holmes said simply. "Until dinner, Dr. Thorn." The scientist nodded and retreated, leaving them alone. Watson set his bag down and crossed to the window, peering out at the fog. "What do you make of it, Holmes?" "The man's clearly shaken, but moving objects. It sounds like a parlor trick." "Perhaps," Holmes said, inspecting the room with a practiced eye. He ran a finger along the edge of a bookshelf, noting the faint layer of dust. "But Thorn is no charlatan. His work in electromagnetic theory is well regarded, if obscure. If he claims to have witnessed something extraordinary, I am inclined to take him at his word, till evidence suggests otherwise." Watson frowned, unconvinced. "You don't believe in the supernatural, Holmes? You've said so yourself." "I don't," Holmes replied, his voice crisp. "But I believe in the limits of human perception and the ingenuity of those who exploit it. What Thorn describes may be a trick, a delusion, or something else entirely. Our task is to discern which." Dinner was a tense affair, served in a dining room that seemed too large for the small group gathered. Thorn sat at the head of the table, flanked by two of his assistants, a wiry young man named Victor Crane, whose sharp features and quick movements suggested a restless energy, and a woman named Clara Henshaw, whose calm demeanor and piercing blue eyes gave little away. Also present was Thorn's niece, Evelyn, a pale young woman with a nervous habit of twisting her napkin. The food, roast pheasant and root vegetables, was simple but well prepared, though the atmosphere was anything but convivial. Holmes steered the conversation with his usual finesse, probing each guest with seemingly innocuous questions. Victor spoke eagerly of his work in the laboratory, though his answers were vague, peppered with technical jargon that seemed designed to impress rather than inform. Clara was more reserved, offering only that she handled the administrative aspects of Thorn's experiments. Evelyn, meanwhile, seemed distracted, her eyes flitting to the windows, as if expecting something to appear. It was during dessert, a tart apple crumble, that the first incident occurred. A heavy silver candelabrum, placed at the center of the table, began to tremble. The candles flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. Watson's fork paused halfway to his mouth as the candelabrum slid, inch by inch, toward the edge of the table. No one touched it. No one was near it. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Victor froze, his eyes wide, while Clara's expression remained unnervingly calm. Thorn, however, leapt to his feet, his face ashen. "There," he cried. "Do you see it? It moves." Holmes was already out of his chair, circling the table with the precision of a predator. He examined the candelabrum, the tablecloth, the floor beneath, his fingers brushing the polished wood as if searching for invisible threads. "Fascinating," he murmured, his voice betraying no alarm. "Watson, note the absence of vibrations in the table. No external force is evident." Watson, his heart pounding despite himself, nodded and reached for his notebook. "No strings, no magnets that I can see," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "But Holmes, it moved. We all saw it." "Indeed we did," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming with something akin to excitement. "And we shall see more, I suspect. Dr. Thorne, I suggest we adjourn to your laboratory. The answers, I believe, lie there." The group rose, their chairs scraping against the floor in a chorus of unease. Thorne led the way, his steps hurried, as if eager to confront whatever awaited them. Watson followed, his mind racing with questions. Was this a trick, as Holmes suspected? Or had they stumbled into something truly inexplicable? The laboratory was housed in a separate wing of the manor, accessible through a series of narrow corridors that seemed to twist and turn at impossible angles. The air grew colder as they approached, and Watson caught the faint hum Thorne had described, a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in his bones. The laboratory itself was a cavernous space, its walls lined with shelves of books, glassware, and strange instruments that glinted in the gaslight. A large workbench dominated the center, cluttered with papers, wires, and a peculiar device that resembled a gyroscope, its metal rings gleaming faintly. Thorne gestured to the workbench, his voice trembling. "This is where it began," he said. "My experiments. They were meant to explore electromagnetic fields, to harness their potential. But something went wrong. The phenomena started weeks ago, small, at first, then more pronounced. Objects moving, lights flickering, sounds without source. I've checked every variable, every calculation. There's no explanation." Holmes moved to the workbench, his fingers tracing the edges of the gyroscope-like device. "This is your prototype, I presume?" he asked. Thorne nodded. "A field generator. It's meant to manipulate electromagnetic waves, but its effects, they're unpredictable. I've dismantled it, rebuilt it, tested it again and again. Yet the anomalies persist." As if in response, the hum grew louder, a deep thrum that seemed to pulse through the room. Watson felt a prickle at the back of his neck, and then, before anyone could react, a glass beaker on the workbench slid forward and crashed to the floor. The sound was deafening in the silence, and Evelyn stifled a scream. Victor swore under his breath, while Clara's eyes narrowed, as if analyzing the event with clinical detachment. Holmes, however, was already on his knees, examining the shards of glass. "No residue, no signs of tampering," he murmured. "The floor is level. The beaker was stable. Curious." Watson's hand hovered near his revolver, though he knew it was useless against whatever this was. "Holmes," he said quietly, "this is beyond a parlor trick. There's no one else in the room. No wires, no magnets. What could cause this?" Holmes rose, his expression unreadable. "I don't know, Watson," he said, and for the first time in their long partnership, Watson detected a trace of uncertainty in his friend's voice. "But I intend to find out." The night stretched on, filled with more questions than answers. Holmes and Watson remained in the laboratory, cataloging every detail, the placement of objects, the faint scratches on the floor, the peculiar hum that came and went like a tide. Thorne, exhausted, retired to his quarters, while his assistants and niece lingered, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. Watson couldn't shake the sense that they were all part of some larger experiment, one whose rules they did not yet understand. As the clock struck midnight, Holmes paused, his eyes fixed on the gyroscope device. "Watson," he said softly, "do you recall the principle of Occam's razor?" "Of course," Watson replied. "The simplest explanation is usually the correct one." "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice low. "And yet, in this place, simplicity eludes us. Every explanation I consider mechanical, psychological, even fraudulent falls short. There is a pattern here, Watson, but it is obscured. We must peel back the layers, one by one, until the truth is laid bare." Watson nodded, though his unease grew with every passing moment. The manor, with its shadowed corridors and inexplicable events, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And as they stood in the laboratory, surrounded by the tools of science and the echoes of the unknown, Watson couldn't help but wonder if they were on the verge of uncovering something far greater and far more dangerous than they had ever encountered before. Chapter 3. The haunted laboratory. The heavy oak door of Thorn Manor creaked as Sherlock Holmes pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched into the heart of the estate. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax polish, undercut by a faint metallic temps that grew stronger as they approached the laboratory. Dr. John Watson, trailing just behind, adjusted his coat against the chill that seemed to seep from the very walls. The journey to this remote manor had been long, and the eerie events of their arrival, objects shifting inexplicably in the drawing room, had left both men on edge. Holmes, however, betrayed no unease. His sharp eyes glinted with curiosity, his mind already dissecting the puzzle. "Remarkable," Holmes murmured, pausing to examine a faint scratch on the doorframe. "This mark is recent, Watson. A tool, perhaps, or a careless foot. Someone has been here, and not with the grace of a welcomed guest." Watson nodded, his hand instinctively brushing the revolver in his pocket. "You think it's connected to the disturbances we saw? That vase sliding across the table? It wasn't the wind." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Wind does not discriminate so precisely, my dear Watson. No, we are dealing with something deliberate. Let us see what Dr. Thorne's laboratory reveals." They descended a spiral staircase, its iron steps clanging under their boots. The manor's isolation, perched on a windswept hill, overlooking a desolate moor, seemed to amplify every sound. At the base of the stairs, a reinforced steel door marked the entrance to the laboratory. A complex lock, gleaming with newness, guarded it. Holmes produced a small leather case from his coat, extracting a set of slender tools. "Thorne mentioned a key in his letter," Watson said, frowning. "Shouldn't we wait for him to let us in?" "Time, Watson, is a luxury we may not have," Holmes replied, already working the lock with deft precision. "Besides, a man who writes of phenomena that defy the laws of physics is unlikely to be punctual when his secrets are at stake." The lock clicked, and the door swung inward, revealing a cavernous room that seemed to hum with latent energy. The laboratory was a marvel of modern science, its walls lined with shelves of glassware, coils of copper wire, and strange, humming machines that pulsed with faint blue light. A long workbench dominated the center, cluttered with papers, tools, and devices that defied immediate recognition. Above, a massive skylight let in the gray light of the overcast sky. Casting long shadows across the floor, Holmes stepped inside, his eyes darting from one detail to another. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing to a series of scorch marks on the workbench. "These are not the result of careless handling. They suggest high-voltage discharges, controlled but powerful." Watson followed, his medical curiosity piqued, despite the unease gnawing at him. Thorne's letter mentioned quantum anomalies. Could these be related? "Possibly," Holmes said, crouching to inspect a pile of journals stacked haphazardly on the floor. "Quantum theory is a fledgling science, Watson, but it deals with the behavior of matter at its smallest scales. If Thorne has ventured into such territory, we may be confronting forces beyond conventional understanding." He opened one of the journals, its pages filled with dense equations and hurried sketches. Watson peered over his shoulder, struggling to make sense of the symbols. What does it say? Holmes traced a finger along a line of text. Thorne writes of manipulating electromagnetic fields to influence physical objects. He claims to have observed spontaneous dislocations, objects moving without apparent cause. Here, look at this. He pointed to a diagram of a coil-like device labeled quantum resonator. If this is functional, it could explain the phenomena we witnessed upstairs. Before Watson could respond, a low hum filled the room, growing louder until it vibrated in their bones. The lights flickered, and a glass beaker on the workbench began to tremble, sliding an inch to the left before stopping. Watson's hand went to his revolver, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Holmes, did you see that?" "I did," Holmes said, his voice calm, but his posture alert. He approached the beaker, examining it without touching. No strings, no magnets, no visible mechanism. Fascinating. The hum ceased abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. Watson's pulse quickened. This place feels wrong, like we're being watched. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he scanned the room. "Your instincts are not entirely unfounded, Watson. But let us not leap to superstition. There is always a rational explanation." He moved to a corner where a large machine stood, its surface studded with dials and switches. A faint glow emanated from within, pulsing irregularly. Holmes reached out, but before he could touch it, the room plunged into darkness. The skylight above seemed to vanish, as if cloaked by an unseen hand. Watson stifled a gasp as a faint greenish glow appeared in the far corner, a shimmering form that wavered like heat rising from a desert road. "Holmes," Watson whispered, his voice tight. "What in God's name is that?" The figure, vaguely humanoid, hovered a foot above the floor, its edges blurred, as if it were not entirely solid. Holmes stepped forward, his expression one of intense focus, rather than fear. "Stay where you are, Watson," he said softly. "Do not move." The apparition shifted, its form coalescing into a face Dr. Elias Thorne's face, or a distorted version of it, with hollow eyes and a mouth that moved soundlessly. Watson's heart pounded, but Holmes remained unfazed, his eyes tracking the figure's movements. "An optical effect," he murmured. "A projection, perhaps, or a manipulation of light." The figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, and the lights flickered back on. Watson exhaled, his hand still gripping his revolver. "Holmes, that was no projection. It looked alive." "Alive or not, it was not natural," Holmes said, already moving toward the spot where the figure had appeared. He knelt, examining the floor. No residue, no scorch marks, no physical trace. Yet the air here is charged. "Feel it, Watson." Watson approached cautiously, extending a hand. The air felt heavy, almost electric, like the moments before. A thunderstorm. What could cause this? Holmes stood, brushing dust from his knees. Thorne's experiments, if his notes are accurate, involve energies that could disrupt the very fabric of reality. But I suspect we are also dealing with human interference. Someone in this manner knows more than they've let on. They resumed their search, methodically cataloging the laboratory's contents. Watson found a second journal, its pages filled with references to anomalous events and unintended consequences. One entry, dated a week prior, stood out. "The resonator's output is unstable. Last night, I saw her again, Clara, as clear as day. Is it guilt, or is the device bridging realms we cannot comprehend?" "Clara," Watson said, reading aloud. "Who's Clara?" Holmes's brow furrowed. "Thorne's late wife, perhaps. Or a figure from his past. The mention of guilt is telling. We must speak with him directly." As they continued, Watson noticed a small, locked cabinet tucked beneath a workbench. "Holmes, over here. This looks suspicious." Holmes joined him, producing his lockpicks once more. The cabinet opened to reveal a collection of glass vials filled with a shimmering, silvery liquid. Each vial was labeled with cryptic symbols, and one bore a tag reading Resonator Core. Holmes lifted it carefully, holding it to the light. "This is no ordinary compound, Watson. It could be a catalyst for Thorne's experiments." Before they could investigate further, a piercing scream echoed from above, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Holmes pocketed the vial and gestured toward the door. "Quickly, Watson. The game is afoot." They raced up the stairs, emerging into the manor's main hall. A maid stood trembling, pointing toward the drawing room. "It moved again," she cried. "The mirror it slid across the wall." Holmes strode to the drawing room, where a large, ornate mirror now rested at an angle, far from its original position. He examined it closely, running his fingers along the frame. No wires, no tracks. "But notice the dust, Watson. It's undisturbed on the floor beneath." This mirror did not slide, was lifted. Watson's mind raced. Lifted. By what? By whom, Watson? Holmes corrected. Or by what? "We are dealing with a force that mimics the impossible, but I wager it is rooted in the possible. Let us return to the laboratory. There is more to uncover." Back in the lab, Holmes focused on the machine that had glowed earlier. He traced its wires to a panel embedded in the wall, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, metallic device, no larger than a pocket watch, with a single, glowing crystal at its center. "This," Holmes said, "is likely the heart of Thorne's experiments. A portable version of his resonator, perhaps." As he spoke, the hum returned, louder this time. The crystal pulsed, and the air grew thick with static. Watson felt a chill down his spine as another apparition appeared this time. A woman in a flowing dress, her face obscured by shadow. She reached out, her hand passing through a nearby table as if it were air. Watson stumbled back, but Holmes stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with fascination. "Observe, Watson," he said. "No heat, no sound beyond the hum. This is not a ghost, but a projection of extraordinary sophistication." The figure dissolved, and the hum faded. Watson wiped sweat from his brow. "Sophistication or not, Holmes, this place is unnatural. What are we dealing with?" Holmes turned, his expression grave. "We are dealing with science pushed to its limits, Watson, and someone who wishes to exploit it. Thorne's journals suggest he's unlocked something dangerous, but I suspect another hand is at work, orchestrating these events to mislead us." They spent hours combing through the laboratory, piecing together fragments of Thorne's research. The journals detailed experiments with electromagnetic fields, quantum entanglement, and something called phase displacement, which Holmes interpreted as a means of bending light and matter. One passage described a test where a small object, a brass key, had vanished entirely, only to reappear hours later in a different room. "If this is true," Holmes said, "Thorne has stumbled upon a discovery that could reshape our understanding of physics." Watson, ever practical, frowned. "But why the apparitions? Why the theatrics?" "To distract, to deceive, or to destroy," Holmes replied. "Someone in this manner wants Thorne's work to remain hidden or to claim it for themselves. We must identify who." As night fell, the laboratory grew colder, the shadows deeper. Holmes lit a lantern, its warm glow a stark contrast to the sterile light of the machines. He pored over the journals, cross-referencing equations with the devices scattered around the room. Watson, meanwhile, kept watch, his nerves fraying with every creak of the manor. "Holmes," he said at last, "what if Thorne himself is behind this? What if he's testing us?" Holmes paused, considering a possibility, but unlikely. His letter was desperate, not calculated. "No, Watson, the hand behind these events is hidden among his circle, someone close, someone trusted." A sudden crash interrupted them. A shelf of glassware had toppled, spilling shards across the floor. Holmes was at the scene in an instant, examining the debris. "This was no accident," he said, pointing to a faint wire looped around the shelf's base. "Sabotage, Watson. Someone was here." They searched the room again, finding no one, but the sense of being watched lingered. Holmes's mind worked furiously, connecting the wire to the earlier disturbances. "This is a staged performance," he said. "The apparitions, the moving objects, they're designed to unsettle us, to make us doubt our senses." Watson clenched his fists. "Then let's find the stagehand." Holmes nodded, his eyes alight with determination. "We will, Watson. But first, we must secure this laboratory. If Thorne's device is as powerful as his notes suggest, it cannot fall into the wrong hands." They barricaded the door, ensuring no one could enter without their knowledge. Holmes pocketed the mysterious crystal device, and they settled in for the night. The lantern casting flickering shadows across the laboratory. Watson couldn't shake the feeling that the manor itself was alive, its secrets pulsing in the dark. As they waited, Holmes began to outline his theory. Thorne's resonator, if functional, could manipulate electromagnetic fields to create illusions objects, moving lights, bending, even apparitions. But such technology requires precision, and precision requires intent. Someone is using it to create chaos. Watson nodded, though his mind struggled to grasp the implications. "And the glowing figures, the woman we saw, a projection, likely triggered by the resonator's crystal," Holmes said. "But the question remains, who controls it, and to what end?" The night wore on, filled with the hum of machines and the occasional creak of the manor. Holmes remained vigilant, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and deductions. Watson, despite his unease, felt a familiar admiration for his friend's relentless pursuit of truth. Whatever secrets Thorne's laboratory held, Holmes would uncover them, no matter how impossible they seemed. By dawn, they had catalogued every device, every journal, and every anomaly. Holmes's notebook was filled with sketches and notes, a map of the mystery unfolding before them. "We have the pieces, Watson," he said, closing the journal. "Now we must find the pattern." As they prepared to confront Dr. Thorne, a faint glow appeared once more, this time from the skylight above. It pulsed, then vanished, leaving only the gray light of morning. Watson shivered, but Holmes's smile was one of triumph. "The game is not over," he said, "but we are closer to its heart. Come, Watson. Let us face the master of this manor and see what truths he hides." They left the laboratory, the weight of its secrets heavy on their shoulders, but Holmes's steps were light, driven by the thrill of the chase. The haunted laboratory had revealed its first clues, but the mystery was far from solved. Somewhere in Thorne Manor, a deceiver waited, and Sherlock Holmes would find them. Chapter 4. Suspects in the Shadows. The rain had begun to fall in earnest as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson settled into the dimly lit drawing room of Thorne Manor. The estate, perched on a desolate hill, seemed to groan under the weight of its own secrets. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and damp stone, and the flickering gas lamps cast long wavering shadows across the walls. The events of the previous night, the inexplicable movement of objects in the dining hall, had left both men on edge, though Holmes's sharp eyes betrayed no trace of unease. Watson, however, clutched his notebook tightly, his pen poised as if to anchor himself against the growing sense of the uncanny. Dr. Elias Thorne, their host, sat across from them, his gaunt frame hunched in a high-backed chair. His hands, gnarled and trembling, clutched a steaming cup of tea, though he had yet to take a sip. The scientist's pale eyes darted nervously toward the windows, where the storm battered the panes with relentless fury. "You've seen it for yourselves," Thorne said, his voice low and strained. "The phenomena defy explanation. I've spent years studying the boundaries of physics, but this is beyond my understanding. I fear I've unleashed something I cannot control." Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Dr. Thorne, let us dispense with vague fears and focus on facts. You claim these events began shortly after your latest experiments. I need to know who else has access to your laboratory, your notes, and your inventions. No detail is too small. Thorne hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the door. My staff, of course, my assistants, my housekeeper, and my family. But they are loyal, Mr. Holmes. I trust them implicitly. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford, Holmes replied coolly. I require names, occupations, and their relationships to you. Watson, take note. Watson opened his notebook, his pen scratching against the paper as Thorne began to speak. There's my chief assistant, Dr. Margaret Hale, a brilliant physicist in her own right. She's been with me for 5 years, overseeing much of the practical work in the laboratory. Then there's Victor Grayson, my secondary assistant, a younger man with a keen mind for engineering. He handles the mechanical aspects of my experiments. My housekeeper, Mrs. Clara Benton, has been with the family for decades. She manages the estate and knows its every corner. And then, my nephew, Leonard Thorne, my late sister's son. He's my heir, though he's shown little interest in my work. He's more preoccupied with his own pursuits. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Pursuits. Thorne shifted uncomfortably. Leonard is a dreamer. He fancies himself an artist, a poet. He's often away in London, mingling with bohemian types. But he's here now, arrived just before the phenomena began. A curious coincidence, Holmes murmured. And their temperaments? Any tensions among them? Thorne sighed, setting his untouched tea on the table. Margaret and Victor. They don't always see eye to eye. Margaret is methodical, precise. Victor is ambitious, perhaps too much so. He's hinted at wanting to publish our findings independently, which Margaret finds reckless. As for Leonard, he keeps to himself. But I've sensed resentment from him perhaps, because my work has always taken precedence over family. Mrs. Benton, bless her, tries to keep the peace, but even she has her limits. Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. Very well, I shall speak with each of them. Watson, we begin immediately. The first to be interviewed was Dr. Margaret Hale, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. She stood in the laboratory, surrounded by a maze of glass tubes, humming machines, and chalkboards covered in equations. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, and her lab coat was pristine, despite the chaos of the room. Holmes paced slowly, his eyes scanning the equipment as he spoke. Dr. Hale, he began, you've worked closely with Dr. Thorne for years. What can you tell me about his recent experiments? Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Elias Doutor, Thorne has been exploring quantum anomalies, phenomena that challenge our understanding of space and energy. His latest project involves manipulating electromagnetic fields to influence physical objects. It's groundbreaking, but unstable. I've warned him about pushing too far, too fast. Holmes paused, his gaze settling on a stack of journals. On the workbench. Unstable in what way? The equipment is experimental, untested. We've observed fluctuations, objects moving unexpectedly, lights flickering, even brief distortions in the air. I thought they were side effects, but after last night. She trailed off, her eyes narrowing. You saw it. That candelabra didn't just fall, it moved. Watson, standing by the door, suppressed a shiver. Could someone be tampering with the equipment? Margaret's expression darkened. Victor Grayson, perhaps. He's been far too curious about Elias's work, always poking around where he shouldn't. He's brilliant, I'll give him that, but he's reckless. I caught him copying notes from Elias's private journal last week. When I confronted him, he claimed it was for backup purposes. Holmes raised an eyebrow. And you didn't report this to Dr. Thorne? I did, she said sharply. Elias dismissed it. He's too trusting of Victor. Always has been. Holmes nodded, his fingers brushing lightly over a glass vial filled with a shimmering liquid. One more question, Dr. Hale. Where were you last night when the candelabra incident occurred? Margaret stiffened. In my quarters, reviewing data. I came down when I heard the commotion. You can ask Mrs. Benton. She saw me leave my room. Thank you, Dr. Hale, Holmes said, his tone neutral. That will be all for now. As they left the laboratory, Watson whispered, She's hiding something, Holmes. Did you see how she tensed when you mentioned last night? Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. Indeed, Watson. But let us reserve judgment until we've spoken to the others. Victor Grayson was next, and the contrast with Margaret Hale could not have been starker. The young engineer, barely 30, lounged in a cluttered office adjoining the laboratory, his feet propped on a desk littered with blueprints and mechanical sketches. His blonde hair was disheveled, and his eyes sparkled with a mix of defiance and amusement as Holmes entered. Mr. Grayson, Holmes began, I understand you handle the mechanical aspects of Dr. Thorne's experiments. Tell me about your role. Victor grinned, leaning back in his chair. I keep the gears turning literally. Elias's ideas are brilliant, but they'd stay on paper without me. I build the machines, calibrate the fields, make sure everything runs smoothly. Or, well, as smoothly as quantum experiments can. Holmes's eyes flicked to the blueprints and your ambitions. Dr. Hale mentioned you've been overzealous in your interest in Dr. Thorne's work. Victor's grin faded slightly. Gotta stick up her well, you know. She's jealous because Elias trusts me with the big stuff. Sure, I've looked at his notes. I'm his assistant, aren't I? I need to understand the whole picture to do my job. Copying private journals is hardly part of your job, Holmes said sharply. What did you hope to gain? Victor's eyes narrowed. Knowledge, Mr. Holmes. That's what we're all here for, isn't it? Elias is sitting on a discovery that could change the world. I just want to make sure it doesn't get buried in this dusty old manor. Watson frowned, scribbling in his notebook. And where were you last night, Mr. Grayson? In the workshop, tinkering with a new coil design. I didn't even know about the candelabra until Margaret came banging on my door, accusing me of sabotage. He leaned forward, his voice lowering. If you ask me, she's the one you should be watching. She's obsessed with controlling Ilias's work, thinks she's the only one who understands it. Holmes's expression remained impassive. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. We'll speak again. As they stepped into the corridor, Watson muttered, He's a slippery one, all charm and no substance. On the contrary, Watson, Holmes replied, he has substance, ambition, to be precise. The question is how far he's willing to go to achieve it. Mrs. Clara Benton, the housekeeper, was a stout woman in her 60s, with a face etched with years of quiet endurance. They found her in the kitchen, kneading dough with a vigor that belied her age. Her gray hair was pinned neatly beneath a cap, and her eyes, though kind, held a wary glint as Holmes and Watson approached. Mrs. Benton, Holmes said, his tone softer than usual. You've served the Thorne family for decades. You must know this estate better than anyone. Have you noticed anything unusual in recent weeks? Clara's hands paused, flour dusting her apron. Unusual? This place has always been full of oddities, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Thorne's experiments. His machines humming at all hours. But lately, yes, things have been stranger. Lights flickering, doors creaking open on their own. I thought it was just the house settling, but after last night, she shook her head. I don't know what to think. Watson leaned forward. Have you seen anyone acting suspiciously, perhaps sneaking around the laboratory or Dr. Thorne's study? Clara's eyes darted toward the door, then back to Holmes. I don't like to speak ill of anyone, sir, but young Leonard's been odd since he arrived. Keeps to himself, mostly, but I've seen him wandering the grounds at night. Once, I caught him near the laboratory door, just standing there, staring. When I asked what he was doing, he muttered something about inspiration and walked off. Holmes's interest piqued, and the others. Dr. Hale, Mr. Grayson. Clara sighed. Dr. Hale's always in that laboratory, day and night. She's devoted to Dr. Thorne, maybe too much so. As for Mr. Grayson, he's a charmer, but I don't trust him. Always poking about, asking questions about the family. He's too curious for his own good. Where were you last night, Mrs. Benton? Holmes asked. In my room, sir, until I heard the crash. I ran downstairs and found Dr. Thorne and Dr. Hale already there. Leonard came in a moment later, looking pale as a ghost. Holmes nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Benton. Your insights are most valuable. As they left the kitchen, Watson whispered, She's loyal, but she's scared. Did you see how she glanced at the door? Fear is a powerful motivator, Watson, Holmes replied. But it's Leonard Thorne who intrigues me most. Let's find him. Leonard Thorne was not easily found. The young man, in his late 20s, had a reputation for elusiveness, and it took nearly an hour to track him down. They found him in a small attic room, converted into a makeshift studio. Surrounded by canvases splashed with chaotic colors and half-finished poems scrawled on scraps of paper. Leonard himself was a striking figure, tall, with dark, unkempt hair and eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. He stood by a window, staring out at the storm, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. Mr. Thorne, Holmes said, stepping into the room. We have questions about your uncle's work and the events of last night. Leonard turned slowly, his expression a mix of curiosity and disdain. My uncle's work. A lot of noise and machinery, Mr. Holmes. I don't pretend to understand it. I'm here because he asked me to come, not because I care about his gadgets. Holmes's eyes scanned the room, noting the absence of scientific texts among the clutter. Yet you've been seen near the laboratory at odd hours. Mrs. Benton mentioned an incident. Leonard's lips curled into a faint smile. Mrs. Benton sees ghosts in every shadow. I was looking for inspiration, that's all. The Manors. A grim place, but it has a certain atmosphere. Perfect for my art. Watson frowned. And last night? Where were you when the candelabra moved? In my room, writing. I came down when I heard the shouting. Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not part of it. My uncle's experiments are his own madness. Holmes stepped closer, his voice low. You stand to inherit this estate, do you not? A man with your artistic temperament might find such wealth useful for your pursuits. Leonard's eyes flashed. If you're suggesting I'd sabotage my uncle's work for money, you're mistaken. I don't need his fortune. I make my own way. Holmes held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. Very well. We'll speak again, Mr. Thorne. As they descended the attic stairs, Watson muttered, He's hiding something, Holmes. That whole tortured artist act feels rehearsed. Perhaps, Holmes said, his eyes distant. But his resentment is genuine. The question is whether it's directed at his uncle or someone else. The interviews left Holmes and Watson with more questions than answers. The Manor's inhabitants were a tangle of motives and secrets, each with their own reasons to resent or covet Dr. Thorne's work. Margaret Hale's jealousy, Victor Grayson's ambition, Clara Benton's fear, and Leonard Thorne's detachment all pointed to a web of rivalries that centered on a single, elusive prize, Thorne's hidden invention. That evening, as the storm grew fiercer, Holmes and Watson returned to the drawing room to confer. Holmes stood by the fireplace, his silhouette stark against the flames. Watson, consider the facts. We have a scientist on the brink of a breakthrough, surrounded by those who might benefit from his success or his failure. The phenomena we've witnessed suggest advanced technology, yet there's a theatricality to them, a deliberate attempt to unsettle. Watson nodded, his notebook open. You think it's staged? Not entirely. Holmes said. The candelabra's movement was real, but the method remains unclear. Magnetic fields, perhaps, or concealed mechanisms. We need to examine the dining hall again, but first, we must consider the human element. Margaret Hale distrusts Victor Grayson, who in turn accuses her of obsession. Mrs. Benton suspects Leonard, who claims indifference but lingers near the laboratory. Each has a motive, but none has a clear opportunity yet. Watson frowned. What about this invention? If it's as groundbreaking as Thorne claims, it could be worth a fortune. Industrial espionage, perhaps. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Precisely, Watson. A device that manipulates electromagnetic fields could revolutionize industry or warfare. Such a prize would attract dangerous attention, but we must tread carefully. The next event may reveal more than its perpetrator intends. As if on cue, a sharp crack echoed through the manor, followed by a scream. Holmes and Watson sprang to their feet, racing toward the source, the laboratory. They arrived to find Dr. Thorne standing amid shattered glass, his face pale. Margaret Hale was beside him, her hands trembling as she pointed to a blackened machine in the corner. It exploded, Thorne whispered. A surge in the field. It shouldn't have happened. Someone tampered with it. Holmes's eyes swept the room, noting the scorched wires and the faint smell of ozone. Tampered, you say? Then we have our first tangible clue. Watson, help me secure this room. No one enters until I've examined every inch. As Watson moved to bar the door, Holmes knelt beside the machine, his mind already racing through possibilities. The shadows of Thorne Manor held their secrets tightly, but Sherlock Holmes was determined to drag them into the light. The investigation continued over the next few days, with Holmes and Watson meticulously piecing together the fragments of evidence. The laboratory became their focal point, its shelves and workbenches yielding a treasure trove of clues. Thorne's journals, filled with dense equations and cryptic diagrams, hinted at a device capable of manipulating electromagnetic fields to move objects without physical contact. Yet the notes were incomplete, with entire pages torn out or obscured by ink blots. Holmes's examination of the dining hall revealed no hidden wires or magnets, but he did find a faint scratch on the floor beneath the candelabra, suggesting it had been deliberately moved before the incident. A distraction, he murmured to Watson. Someone wanted us to focus on the spectacle, not the mechanics. Meanwhile, Watson observed the manor's inhabitants closely. Margaret Hale grew increasingly agitated, her sharp tongue lashing out at Victor Grayson during meals. Victor, in turn, made a point of flaunting his access to the laboratory, casually mentioning adjustments he'd made to the equipment. Mrs. Benton kept her distance, but her eyes followed Leonard Thorne whenever he entered a room. Leonard himself remained elusive, often disappearing for hours, only to reappear with paint-stained hands and a vague excuse about sketching the moors. One evening, as Holmes and Watson pored over Thorne's journals in the library, a new piece of the puzzle emerged. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, Holmes discovered a small notebook, its pages filled with coded messages. The cipher was complex, but Holmes's mind unraveled it within hours. The messages referenced a buyer, interested in Thorne's invention, someone willing to pay handsomely for its secrets. The handwriting matched none of the manor's inhabitants, but the implications were clear. Someone was communicating with an outsider. Industrial espionage. As you suspected, Watson, Holmes said, his voice low. But the question remains. Who is the traitor? The answer came sooner than expected. Late that night, as the storm raged on, Watson awoke to a faint noise, a soft thud from the direction of the laboratory. He roused Holmes, and the two crept downstairs, their footsteps muffled by the thick rugs. In the laboratory, they found Victor Grayson hunched over a workbench, a screwdriver in hand, and a guilty look on his face. "Mr. Grayson," Holmes said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Explain yourself." Victor froze, then straightened, his charm replaced by defiance. I was just checking the equipment. After the explosion, I wanted to make sure it was safe. Holmes stepped closer, his eyes locked on Victor's. With a screwdriver. At midnight. Try again. Victor's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a crash echoed from the corridor. Holmes and Watson spun around, only to see Leonard Thorne sprinting toward the manor's front door, a satchel clutched under his arm. Without a word, Holmes gave chase, Watson close behind. The pursuit led them into the storm, the rain lashing their faces as they followed Leonard through the fog-shrouded grounds. He vanished into a copse of trees, but Holmes's keen eyes spotted a hidden trapdoor beneath a gnarled oak. It led to a tunnel system beneath the manor, its walls lined with damp stone and flickering torches. An escape route, Holmes said, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. Or a hiding place. They followed the tunnel, emerging in a small chamber filled with crates and scientific equipment. Leonard stood in the center, his satchel open to reveal a gleaming metal device, prototype mentioned in Thorne's journals. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with defiance. "You don't understand," Leonard said, his voice trembling. "This invention, it's dangerous. I was going to destroy it, to protect my uncle." Holmes's expression was unreadable. "A noble sentiment, Mr. Thorne, but your actions suggest otherwise. That satchel also contains documents you intended to sell, perhaps." Leonard's shoulders slumped, but he said nothing. Watson stepped forward, his revolver drawn. "It's over, Leonard. Come with us." As they escorted Leonard back to the manor, Holmes's mind was already piecing together the final threads of the mystery. The coded messages, the tampered equipment, the staged phenomena all pointed to a conspiracy deeper than a single traitor. But for now, Leonard Thorne was their key, and Holmes would not rest until every shadow in Thorne Manor was illuminated. The days that followed were a whirlwind of revelations. Leonard's confession, extracted under Holmes's relentless questioning, revealed a partial truth. He had been approached by an unknown party, offering a fortune for his uncle's invention. Desperate for funds to support his artistic ambitions, he had agreed to steal the prototype, but he claimed the phenomena, the moving objects, the glowing apparitions, were not his doing. Holmes, however, was unconvinced. "Your story explains the theft, Mr. Thorne, but not the theatrics. Someone else is manipulating events, using your betrayal as a distraction." The breakthrough came when Holmes re-examined the laboratory's damaged machine. Hidden within its wiring was a small, cleverly concealed device, miniature projector, capable of creating holographic illusions. "An elegant trick," Holmes said, holding the device to the light. "Combined with electromagnetic fields, it could simulate the impossible. But who planted it?" The answer lay in Margaret Hale. Under pressure, she admitted to sabotaging the machine, not to steal the invention, but to delay its completion. "Elias was moving too fast," she confessed, tears in her eyes. "I feared the consequences of his work on controlled anomalies, dangerous applications. I staged the phenomena to scare him into stopping." Holmes's gaze was cold. "And in doing so, you provided the perfect cover for Leonard's theft. Your actions, Dr. Hale, have endangered more than you know." With the culprits identified, Holmes turned his attention to the buyer mentioned in the coded messages. The trail led to a shadowy figure in London, a rival industrialist with ties to foreign governments. Though the man escaped justice for now, Holmes ensured Thorne's invention was secured, its secrets safe from exploitation. As the storm cleared and the manor returned to quiet, Holmes and Watson prepared to leave. Dr. Thorne, shaken but grateful, shook their hands. "You've saved my work, Mr. Holmes. I don't know how to thank you." Holmes's smile was faint. "The truth is its own reward, Dr. Thorne, but I suggest you choose your allies more carefully in the future." As they boarded the carriage back to London, Watson glanced at Holmes. Another case solved, but I can't shake the feeling there's more to this. Holmes's eyes gleamed. There always is, Watson. But for now, we've banished the shadows. Let that suffice. The carriage rolled into the fog, leaving Thorn Manor and its secrets behind, but not for good. Chapter 5. The Vanishing Artifact. The heavy oak door of Thorn Manor's laboratory creaked shut behind Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson as they stepped into the dimly lit room, their footsteps echoing against the stone floor. The air was thick, with the scent of ozone and chemicals, a testament to Dr. Elias Thorne's relentless experiments. Shelves lined with glass vials, intricate machinery, and leather-bound journals stretched along the walls, while a massive steel safe dominated one corner, its surface gleaming faintly under the flicker of gas lamps. The safe, Holmes had been told, housed Thorne's most prized creation, a prototype device the scientist claimed could manipulate the very fabric of reality. Now, as the clock struck 10 in the evening, the manor was silent, save for the occasional groan of the old building settling into the night. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the room, his mind already dissecting the scene. "Watson," he said, his voice low and precise, "note the arrangement of the equipment. Nothing appears disturbed, yet Dr. Thorne insists the prototype was stolen from that safe not 2 hours ago. A locked room, no signs of forced entry, and no footprints in the dust. Curious, wouldn't you say?" Watson, clutching his notebook, nodded, though his brow furrowed with unease. "Curious is one word for it, Holmes. Impossible is another. The safe is bolted to the floor, and the lock is untouched. How does something vanish from a sealed container in a room no one entered?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Impossibilities are merely puzzles, awaiting a solution, my dear Watson. Let us begin with the facts." The two men approached the safe, its imposing steel frame unmarred by scratches or dents. Holmes knelt, his magnifying glass catching the light as he examined the lock. "A combination lock, intricate but not impregnable," he murmured. "No signs of tampering, no scratches, no residue of explosives, no trace of acid. The thief, if there was one, was either extraordinarily skilled or something else entirely." Watson shifted uncomfortably, his practical mind wrestling with the implications. "Thorne swears he locked the safe himself after showing the device to his assistants this afternoon. Only he knows the combination. Could he be mistaken?" Holmes straightened, his gaze drifting to the room's single window, its heavy iron shutters bolted from the inside. "Dr. Thorne is a man of precision. I doubt he would misremember such a detail." "No, Watson, the answer lies not in error, but in design. Someone or something wanted that device, and they went to great lengths to make its disappearance inexplicable." The laboratory door opened, and Dr. Elias Thorne entered, his gaunt face pale and his hands trembling slightly. His gray hair was disheveled, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice strained, "have you found anything? The prototype, it's not just valuable, it's dangerous in the wrong hands. If it's been stolen—" Holmes raised a hand, his expression calm but commanding. "Dr. Thorne, let us proceed methodically. You last saw the device at 4 o'clock this afternoon, correct?" Thorne nodded vigorously. Yes. I demonstrated it briefly to my assistants, Miss Clara Henshaw and Mr. Victor Grayson. They've been with me for years, loyal to a fault. Afterward, I locked it in the safe, as always. I returned at 8 to check on it, and it was gone. Just gone." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And no one else entered this room between 4 and 8? "No one," Thorne insisted. "The door was locked, the window shuttered. I have the only key, and the combination is known only to me." Watson scribbled notes, his pen scratching against the paper. "What does this prototype do, exactly?" "You've been vague, Dr. Thorne. If we're to find it, we need to understand its nature. Thorne hesitated, his fingers twisting together. It's difficult to explain. The device manipulates electromagnetic fields in ways that defy conventional physics. It can bend light, alter perceptions, even affect small objects, positions, without physical contact. I was on the verge of a breakthrough, but it's not ready for public use. In the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic. Holmes's expression remained impassive, though his mind was clearly racing. A device that bends light and moves objects without touch, he mused. That would explain the phenomena we witnessed upon our arrival, the candelabrum sliding across the table, the book falling from the shelf. But a theft that requires intent, not merely capability. He turned to the safe again, his fingers tracing the edges of the door. Watson, observe the floor. The dust is undisturbed, save for our own footprints, and Dr. Thorne's. No one else has crossed this threshold since the last cleaning, which, judging by the accumulation, was at least 2 days ago. Watson peered at the floor, his military-trained eyes confirming Holmes's observation. Not a single mark. It's as if the thief floated in and out, or never entered at all, Holmes said cryptically. He turned to Thorne. Tell me about your assistants, Miss Henshaw and Mr. Grayson. Their demeanor during the demonstration, anything unusual? Thorne frowned, thinking Clara was her usual self, quiet, attentive, taking notes. Victor seemed distracted. He's been under strain lately. Personal matters, I believe, but I trust them both, implicitly. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford, Dr. Thorne. I will need to speak with them, separately. The drawing room of Thorne Manor was a stark contrast to the laboratory's sterile chaos. Plush armchairs and a roaring fire created an illusion of warmth, but the tension in the air was palpable. Clara Henshaw, a young woman with sharp features and a tightly coiled bun, sat rigidly, her hands folded in her lap. Her dark eyes followed Holmes as he paced before the fireplace. Miss Henshaw, Holmes began, his tone measured, describe the demonstration this afternoon. Every detail, no matter how trivial. Clara's voice was steady, though her fingers tightened slightly. Dr. Thorne showed us the prototype, a small, cylindrical device, no larger than a pocket watch, with a glass core and copper wiring. He activated it briefly, and a glass beaker on the table moved about an inch without anyone touching it. He said it was a controlled test of electromagnetic manipulation. We were both amazed, though Victor seemed unsettled. Holmes paused, his eyes locking onto hers. Unsettled how? He was fidgeting, looking at the door as if expecting someone. He asked Dr. Thorne if the device could be replicated, which seemed odd. Dr. Thorne said it was one of a kind, at least for now. Watson, seated nearby, jotted down her words. And after the demonstration, what happened? Dr. Thorne locked the device in the safe, as he always does. Victor and I left the lab together, and I went to my quarters to transcribe my notes. I didn't see Victor again until dinner. Holmes nodded, his mind cataloging her responses. One last question, Miss Henshaw. Have you noticed anything unusual in the manor recently? Strange noises, objects out of place, unfamiliar visitors. Clara hesitated, her lips parting slightly. Before she spoke, last night, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside my room, around midnight. I looked out, but no one was there. I thought it might be the wind, but it felt deliberate. Holmes thanked her and dismissed her, his expression unreadable. As she left, Watson leaned forward. She's hiding something, Holmes? That she knows more than she's saying. Possibly, Holmes replied, his eyes on the fire. Or she's merely nervous. Let us see what Mr. Grayson reveals. Victor Grayson was a wiry man in his 30s, with a perpetually furrowed brow and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles. He entered the drawing room with a hesitant step, his eyes darting between Holmes and Watson. Mr. Grayson, Holmes said, his voice smooth but probing. "Miss Henshaw tells me you were distracted during the demonstration. Care to explain?" Grayson's hands twitched, and he pushed his spectacles up his nose. I suppose I was. My sister is ill, and I've been worried about her. It's nothing to do with the device." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "You asked Dr. Thorne if the device could be replicated. Why?" Grayson flushed, his voice rising slightly. "Curiosity, that's all. It's an extraordinary invention. I wondered if others could be made, perhaps for commercial use. Dr. Thorne's work could change the world, or line someone's pockets," Holmes said dryly. "Where were you? Between 4 and 8 this evening?" "In the library, working on calculations for Dr. Thorne. I was alone. Clara can confirm I left the lab with her after the demonstration." Holmes leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And have you noticed anything unusual in the manor? Strange occurrences, perhaps?" Grayson swallowed hard. 2 nights ago, I saw a light in the laboratory window, long after Dr. Thorne had retired. I thought it was him, but when I checked, the lab was empty. I didn't mention it. I didn't want to alarm anyone." Holmes dismissed Grayson, his mind already piecing together the fragments of testimony. "Watson," he said once they were alone, "we have a locked room, a missing device, and 2 assistants with stories that don't quite align. Add to that the mysterious footsteps and lights, and we have a puzzle that grows more intricate by the hour." Watson rubbed his temples. "Holmes, are you suggesting one of them stole the device? But how? The safe was locked, the room undisturbed. It's as if the thing vanished into thin air." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a familiar spark. "Thin air, Watson, is precisely where we must look. Let us return to the laboratory. There are clues we've yet to uncover." Back in the laboratory, Holmes moved with purpose, his magnifying glass sweeping over every surface. He examined the window shutters, the floorboards, even the ceiling, but found no hidden panels or secret passages. The safe remained an enigma, its lock pristine and its contents, save for the prototype, intact. Watson watched, his frustration mounting. "Holmes, we've been over every inch of this room. There's nothing here. Could the device itself be the key? If it can move objects without touch, perhaps it moved itself." Holmes chuckled, a rare sound that echoed in the quiet room. "An intriguing theory, Watson, but machines do not act of their own volition. No, the answer lies in human ingenuity or deception. Consider the assistants, Clara's hesitation, Grayson's nervous demeanor. One of them knows more than they admitted." He paused, his gaze settling on a small table near the safe, where a single glass beaker sat, its surface catching the lamplight. "Watson, do you recall Miss Henshaw's description of the demonstration? The beaker moved an inch, yet this beaker is precisely centered on the table, as if never disturbed." Watson frowned, stepping closer. "You're right. If it moved during the demonstration, why is it perfectly placed now?" Holmes's fingers brushed the table's edge, and he froze. "Watson, look here." He pointed to a faint scratch, barely visible, running along the table's underside. "This is recent." And here he knelt, examining the floor beneath. The table, a tiny speck of metal, no larger than a pinhead. Copper, perhaps. Watson's eyes widened. "From the device." "Possibly," Holmes said, pocketing the speck. "Or from something used to extract it. We need to consider the mechanics of this theft. A device that manipulates electromagnetic fields could, in theory, be removed without opening the safe if one could access it remotely." Watson shook his head. "That's beyond my understanding, Holmes. You're saying someone used another device to pull it through the safe." "Not through," Holmes corrected. "Around. Or perhaps not at all. We must consider misdirection. What if the device was never in the safe to begin with?" Watson stared, incredulous. "But Thorne said he locked it himself." "And yet," Holmes said, his voice low, "we have only his word." Let us test that word. The night deepened, and the manor grew colder, the wind howling outside as Holmes and Watson continued their investigation. They summoned Dr. Thorne back to the laboratory, where Holmes confronted him with a directness that made the scientist flinch. "Dr. Thorne," Holmes said, "you claim you locked the device in the safe at 4 o'clock, yet I find it curious that a man of your precision would not notice a discrepancy in the safe's contents. Tell me, did you open the safe between 4 and 8, even briefly?" Thorne's eyes widened, and he stammered, No, of course not. I locked it and left the lab. I swear it." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "And yet, the beaker on the table described as moving during your demonstrations perfectly centered, as if untouched. Either your demonstration was a fabrication, or someone reset the scene. Which is it?" Thorne's face paled further, and he sank into a chair. I don't know. I swear I saw the device in the safe, but the phenomena we've observed, the moving objects, the lights, perhaps they're affecting my judgment. I'm not myself, Mr. Holmes." Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes, his concern evident. "Holmes, if Thorne's telling the truth, we're back to square one. No footprints, no forced entry, no clues." Holmes's lips curved into a grim smile. "On the contrary, Watson, we have clues aplenty. The scratch on the table, the speck of copper, the perfectly placed beaker. Someone has gone to great lengths to create an illusion of impossibility, and I intend to shatter that illusion." He turned to Thorne. "Tomorrow, I will need access to your journals, all of them, and I want a detailed account of every experiment conducted with the prototype. Leave nothing out." Thorne nodded weakly, his hands trembling. "Of course, Mr. Holmes. Anything you need." As Thorne left, Watson turned to Holmes, his voice low. "You suspect him, don't you? Thorne himself?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "I suspect everyone, Watson. But Thorne's fear is genuine, whether of discovery or loss, I cannot yet say. Tomorrow, we dig deeper. The truth, like the device, is hidden, but not beyond our reach." The following morning, the manor was abuzz with tension. Clara and Grayson avoided each other's gaze at breakfast, and Thorne barely touched his food, his eyes haunted. Holmes, however, was invigorated, his mind a whirlwind of deductions as he pored over Thorne's journals in the laboratory. The journals were a treasure trove of scientific ambition, filled with diagrams of electromagnetic coils, equations for manipulating light, and cryptic references to quantum anomalies. One passage caught Holmes's eye. The prototype, when activated at high frequency, creates a localized distortion field, rendering objects invisible to the naked eye. Potential for misuse is significant. Holmes closed the journal, his mind racing. "Watson, if the device can render objects invisible, it could explain the theft or the illusion of one. Suppose the device was never removed, but merely hidden, its field activated to make it appear gone." Watson's jaw dropped. "You mean it's still in the safe?" "Possibly," Holmes said. "Or it was removed in plain sight, under the guise of invisibility. We need to test the safe's contents again." They returned to the safe, and Holmes, with Thorne's reluctant permission, opened it. Inside were papers, a few tools, and an empty space where the prototype should have been. But Holmes's fingers brushed the back of the safe, and he paused, feeling a faint vibration. "Watson," he said, his voice sharp, "fetch a mirror." Watson, puzzled but obedient, retrieved a small hand mirror from his medical bag. Holmes positioned it inside the safe, angling it carefully. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint shimmer appeared, a distortion in the air, like heat rising from a summer road. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "As I suspected, the device is still here, or was until recently. Its field is active, bending light to conceal it. Someone activated it remotely, or left it running." Watson stared, incredulous. But who and how? Holmes straightened, his mind already racing ahead. That, Watson, is the question. We have a device that manipulates reality, a locked room with no entry, and a cast of suspects with motives yet to be fully uncovered. The game, as they say, is afoot. The day unfolded with a series of interviews, each revealing new layers of the manor's secrets. Clara admitted to overhearing a heated argument between Thorne and his brother, Reginald, a week prior, though she claimed not to know the details. Grayson confessed to receiving an anonymous letter offering a large sum for information about Thorne's work, which he claimed to have ignored. Thorne himself grew increasingly erratic, muttering about forces beyond our control and refusing to elaborate. Holmes, undeterred, focused on the physical evidence. He returned to the laboratory repeatedly, examining the table, the safe, and the surrounding equipment. The speck of copper, he determined, matched the wiring described in Thorne's journals, suggesting it had been dislodged during the theft. Its staging. The scratch on the table hinted at a tool, perhaps a magnet or a specialized device, used to manipulate the prototype. By evening, Holmes had a working theory, though he kept it close. Watson, he said, as they sat in the Manors library, consider the possibility of a second device. Suppose someone, Clara, Grayson, or even Thorne himself, created a duplicate prototype, one capable of activating the original remotely. It would explain the lack of footprints, the undisturbed safe, and the shimmering distortion. Watson frowned, his mind struggling to keep up. But why go to such lengths? If they wanted the device, why not simply take it? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Because, Watson, this is not merely a theft. It's a performance. Someone wants us to believe the impossible, to distract us from the truth. And I suspect that truth lies not in the device itself, but in what it represents: power, wealth, or, perhaps, revenge. As night fell, Holmes and Watson patrolled the Manor's grounds, their lanterns casting long shadows in the fog. The air was thick with moisture, and the distant rumble of thunder hinted at an approaching storm. Holmes's senses were on high alert, his every step deliberate. "Watson," he said suddenly, stopping near the laboratory's exterior wall, "do you hear that?" Watson strained his ears, catching a faint hum, like the vibration of a tuning fork. "What is it?" Holmes knelt, pressing his ear to the ground. "A machine, Watson. Something is active beneath us. A generator, perhaps." Or he froze as a shadow moved in the fog, swift and silent. Without a word, Holmes sprang to his feet, motioning for Watson to follow. They pursued the figure through the Manor's gardens, their lanterns bobbing in the darkness. The chase led them to a hidden trapdoor, concealed beneath a rosebush, its hinges freshly oiled. Holmes's eyes gleamed with triumph. "A tunnel, Watson. Our thieves' escape route or their staging ground." They descended into the darkness, the hum growing louder. The tunnel was narrow, its walls damp and lined with cables that pulsed with faint light. At its end was a small chamber, filled with machinery, a makeshift laboratory, hidden beneath the Manor. In the center stood a device identical to Thorne's description of the prototype, its glass core glowing faintly. Beside it was a figure, cloaked in shadow, who froze at their approach. "Step into the light," Holmes commanded, his voice like steel. The figure hesitated, then stepped forward, revealing Victor Grayson, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Mr. Holmes," he stammered, "I can explain." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "You will, Mr. Grayson, and you will start with why you have a duplicate of Dr. Thorne's device and how you used it to stage the theft of the original." Grayson's shoulders slumped, and he sank to the ground, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "It wasn't theft," he whispered. "It was survival." The interrogation that followed was tense, with Grayson's confession unraveling a web of deceit. He admitted to building a duplicate device, using Thorne's designs, to test its capabilities in secret. His plan was to sell the technology to a rival scientist, hoping to fund his sister's medical treatment. The theft was a ruse, designed to make Thorne believe the original was stolen while Grayson perfected his duplicate. But the original is still in the safe, Grayson insisted. I activated its distortion field remotely. Using this, he gestured to the device in the chamber. It's invisible, but it's there. I never meant to harm anyone. Holmes's expression was unreadable. A clever ruse, Mr. Grayson, but incomplete. The scratch on the table, the copper spectos suggest physical interference, not just a distortion field. And the footsteps Miss Henshaw heard, the lights you saw someone else is involved. Who? Grayson shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. I don't know. I swear it. I thought I was alone in this. Holmes turned to Watson, his voice low. We have part of the truth, Watson, but not all. Grayson's confession explains the mechanics, but not the motive behind the larger phenomena. Someone else is pulling the strings. As they escorted Grayson back to the manor, the storm broke, rain lashing the grounds. Holmes's mind was a whirlwind, piecing together the clues, the scratch, the copper, the tunnel, the duplicate device. The theft was no theft at all, but a carefully orchestrated illusion designed to mislead. Yet the glowing apparitions, the moving objects, the chilling visions Watson had reported, those remained unexplained, hinting at a deeper conspiracy. In the manor's great hall, Holmes gathered Thorne, Clara, and Grayson, his eyes scanning their faces. The prototype is safe, he announced, but the danger is not. Someone in this room has orchestrated a deception, using Dr. Thorne's science to create fear and confusion. I will find you out, Clara gasped. Thorne paled, and Grayson looked away, guilt written across his face. But Holmes's gaze lingered on the shadows beyond, where another figure might lurk. Unseen, the night was far from over, and the truth, like the prototype, remained just out of sight. Chapter 6. Clues from the ether. The air in Thorne Manor hung heavy with the scent of ozone and old paper, as though the very walls exhaled the residue of Dr. Elias Thorne's experiments. Sherlock Holmes sat at a cluttered desk in the scientist's study, a single gas lamp casting long shadows across the room. The flickering light danced over piles of journals, loose papers, and cryptic diagrams that seemed to pulse with secrets of their own. Dr. John Watson stood by the window, peering out into the foggy night, his breath fogging the glass as he wrestled with the unease that had settled in his chest since their arrival. The manor, with its creaking floors and inexplicable phenomena, seemed to hum with a life of its own, and Watson could not shake the sense that they were being watched not by human eyes, but by something intangible, something that lingered in the spaces between reason and fear. Holmes, as ever, appeared unperturbed. His long fingers moved with surgical precision, flipping through one of Thorne's leather-bound journals. The pages were filled with dense notations, mathematical equations, and sketches of peculiar devices that defied easy comprehension. Holmes's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the text with the intensity of a hawk tracking its prey. Fascinating, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the room. Dr. Thorne was no mere tinkerer. His work ventures into realms most scientists would dismiss as fantasy. Watson turned from the window, his brow furrowed. You mean his talk of quantum anomalies? It sounds like madness, Holmes. Objects moving without cause, apparitions in the dark, it's the stuff of ghost stories, not science. Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile, though his gaze remained fixed on the journal. Madness, Watson, is often the label we assign to what we cannot yet explain. Thorne's notes suggest he was manipulating electromagnetic fields in ways that challenge conventional physics. If he succeeded, even partially, it could account for some of the phenomena we've witnessed. Watson crossed his arms, his skepticism undimmed, and the glowing figures we saw in the laboratory. You'll tell me those were electromagnetic fields too. Holmes closed the journal with a soft thud and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Not entirely, perhaps. But consider this. Light can be bent, shaped, even projected to create illusions. Thorne's experiments may involve such techniques, whether by design or accident. Our task is to separate the deliberate from the incidental. Watson opened his mouth to reply, but a sudden, sharp chill ran through him, as though an icy hand had brushed the back of his neck. He spun around, expecting to see someone behind him, but the room was empty, save for Holmes, who raised an eyebrow at his friend's sudden movement. "What is it, Watson?" Holmes asked, his tone calm but alert. "I felt something," Watson said, his voice low, like a presence. "It's this blasted place, Holmes. It's playing tricks on my nerves." Holmes rose from the desk, his movements fluid and deliberate. "Your nerves are as steady as any man's, Watson. If you felt something, it merits investigation." He crossed the room to where Watson stood, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Describe it precisely." Watson hesitated, feeling foolish, but compelled to speak. "It was cold, like a draft, but sharper. And for a moment, I thought I saw something, a flicker, like a figure in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing." Holmes's gaze darted to the window, then to the walls, as if he could see through them to the manor's hidden workings. "Interesting," he said, his voice a low hum. "Let us assume, for now, that your sensation was not mere fancy. Thorne's notes mentioned distortions in the electromagnetic spectrum effects that could, in theory, influence human perception. We must explore this further." He returned to the desk and picked up another journal, this one bound in black leather with a faint metallic sheen. As he opened it, a loose sheet of paper slipped out, fluttering to the floor. Holmes retrieved it, his eyes narrowing as he examined the contents. The page was covered in a series of cryptic symbols, lines, circles, and angular shapes that resembled no alphabet Watson had ever seen. "What on earth is that?" Watson asked, leaning over Holmes's shoulder. "A code," Holmes replied, his voice tinged with excitement. Thorne was cautious. "It seems. This is no ordinary shorthand. It's a cipher, and a sophisticated one at that." He spread the sheet on the desk, smoothing it with care. "If we are to understand his work and the events plaguing this manor, we must decipher it." Watson watched as Holmes's fingers traced the symbols, his mind already working through the puzzle. The detective's ability to unravel such mysteries was a source of endless fascination for Watson, but tonight, the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on him. The manor's eerie atmosphere, coupled with the inexplicable events they had witnessed, made him question whether even Holmes's razor-sharp intellect could make sense of it all. "Holmes," Watson said, his voice quieter now, "do you truly believe there's a rational explanation for everything here? The moving objects, the apparitions, this feeling I just had. What if Thorne stumbled onto something beyond science?" Holmes's eyes flicked up to meet Watson's, and for a moment, the detective's expression softened. "My dear Watson, science is not a fixed boundary but a frontier, ever expanding. What seems impossible today may be commonplace tomorrow. Thorne's work, however extraordinary, operates within the laws of nature, even if we do not yet fully understand them. Our task is to uncover the mechanism, not to succumb to superstition." Watson nodded, though his unease lingered. "Very well. Where do we begin with this cipher?" Holmes tapped the sheet with a finger. "First, we identify patterns. The symbols repeat in specific sequences, suggesting a substitution cipher, or perhaps a Polybius square. But the complexity indicates Thorne was protecting something of great value, perhaps the key to his invention." For the next hour, Holmes and Watson pored over the cryptic sheet, with Holmes scribbling notes on a separate piece of paper. The detective's mind worked like a machine, testing hypotheses, discarding false leads, and gradually piecing together the puzzle. Watson, though no stranger to codes from his military days, found himself struggling to keep up with Holmes's relentless pace. The symbols seemed to swim before his eyes, their meaning just out of reach. At last, Holmes leaned back, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "I have it," he declared. "The cipher is based on a modified Vigenère square, with a keyword derived from Thorne's own name. The symbols represent letters, but they're rotated through a mathematical sequence tied to electromagnetic frequencies. Quite ingenious." Watson blinked, trying to follow. "And what does it say?" Holmes read from his notes, his voice steady but laced with intensity. "The device bends light and gravity, creating echoes in the ether. Fields align at precise frequencies, but instability risks temporal distortion. Beware the mirrors." Edge. Watson stared at him, his mind grappling with the words. Temporal, distortion, mirrors. "Holmes, this sounds like something out of a Jules Verne novel." "Perhaps," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. "But Thorne's notes suggest he was experimenting with electromagnetic fields to manipulate physical properties, light, gravity, perhaps even time itself. If his device can create such effects, it could explain the phenomena we've observed. Objects moving, apparitions, even your sensation of a presence." Before Watson could respond, a low hum filled the room, like the vibration of a tuning fork. The gas lamp flickered, and the air seemed to thicken, as though charged with static. Watson's heart quickened, and he reached for his revolver, though he wasn't sure what he intended to aim at. Holmes, however, remained still, his eyes darting around the room as if tracking an invisible force. "Steady, Watson," he said softly. "This may be another manifestation of Thorne's work. Observe closely." The hum grew louder, and then, in the corner of the room, a faint glow appeared, a shimmering, translucent shape that wavered like heat rising from a desert road. Watson's breath caught in his throat as the shape coalesced into something resembling a human figure. Its edges blurred and indistinct. It hovered for a moment, then vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Watson's hand tightened on his revolver. "Holmes, tell me you saw that." "I did," Holmes replied, his voice calm but his eyes alight with curiosity. "And it confirms my suspicions. This was no ghost, Watson, but a projection, likely a byproduct of Thorne's device interacting with the Manor's electrical systems." Watson lowered his weapon, his heart still pounding. "A projection? Of what?" "That," Holmes said, rising from the desk, "is what we must discover. Come, Watson, we return to the laboratory. If Thorne's device is active, it may be producing these effects unintentionally, or someone is controlling it." The two men left the study, their footsteps echoing in the silent corridors of Thorne Manor. The air grew colder as they descended to the laboratory, a vast, cavernous space filled with strange machinery and the faint smell of scorched metal. The laboratory was dimly lit, its walls lined with shelves of equipment and glass cases containing odd, metallic components. In the center stood a large, cylindrical device, its surface etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dark. Holmes approached the device, his eyes scanning its surface. "This must be the prototype mentioned in Thorne's notes," he said. "A machine capable of manipulating electromagnetic fields on a scale I've never encountered. If it's operational, it'd cowl." Watson, still shaken by the apparition in the study, kept his distance. "And if someone's tampering with it, one of Thorne's assistants, perhaps." "A possibility," Holmes said, circling the device. "The jealous colleague, Dr. Harrow, has the expertise to understand Thorne's work. The secretive heir, Miss Clara, might have financial motives. Even the servants could be involved, though their access to the laboratory would be limited." As Holmes examined the device, Watson's gaze wandered to a nearby table, where a stack of papers caught his eye. He approached, picking up a sheet covered in more of Thorne's cryptic symbols. But as he held it, the same chilling sensation washed over him, a cold, electric prickle that seemed to seep into his bones. The room tilted, and for a fleeting moment, Watson saw a vision, a man in a white coat, standing in this very laboratory. His face contorted in fear as a blinding light enveloped him. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Watson gasping. "Holmes," he called, his voice hoarse. "I saw someone, in this room, as if it were happening now." Holmes was at his side in an instant, his eyes sharp with concern. "Describe it, Watson. Every detail." Watson recounted the vision, his words tumbling out in a rush. "It was a man, I'm sure of it. He looked like Thorne, from the portrait in the hall. He was working on that device, and then there was a flash, like an explosion, but silent. It felt so real, Holmes, like I was there." Holmes's expression grew grave. "This is no mere hallucination, Watson. If Thorne's device can manipulate electromagnetic fields, it might also affect the human mind, perhaps even induce vivid memories or projections of past events. Your vision could be an echo of something that happened here." "An echo?" Watson asked, his voice unsteady. "You mean a memory trapped in this place?" "Possibly," Holmes said, his mind racing. Thorne's notes mention temporal distortion. If his device interacts with time as well as space, it could create phenomena that defy our understanding of causality. But we must remain grounded in evidence. Let us search the laboratory for clues to what happened to Thorne and what is happening now." For the next several hours, Holmes and Watson combed through the laboratory, examining every piece of equipment, every scrap of paper. Holmes's focus was absolute, his mind sifting through the chaos of Thorne's experiments to find order. Watson, though still rattled by his vision, followed Holmes's lead. Cataloging their findings with military precision, they discovered more coded messages, each one adding to the picture of Thorne's work. One note spoke of a mirror field, a theoretical construct that could bend light to create illusions of movement or presence. Another described a gravity well, a localized distortion that could cause objects to shift without apparent force. But the most intriguing find was a small, metallic disc hidden in a locked drawer. Its surface was inscribed with the same cryptic symbols as the coded sheet, and it hummed faintly when Holmes touched it. "This," Holmes said, holding the disc to the light, "is no mere trinket. It may be a component of Thorne's device or a key to its operation." As they continued their search, the laboratory seemed to come alive around them. The hum from earlier returned, louder now, and the air grew thick with static. Lights flickered, and shadows danced on the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human. Watson's nerves were frayed, but Holmes remained a pillar of calm, his mind cutting through the chaos like a blade dot. At last, they found a hidden panel behind a bookshelf, revealing a small, locked safe. Holmes knelt before it, his lock-picking tools already in hand. "If Thorne hid anything of value, it will be here," he said, his fingers working with practiced ease. The safe clicked open, revealing a single leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled with Thorne's handwriting, but the text was interspersed with diagrams of the cylindrical device and references to something called the etheric resonance. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he read, his mind piecing together the final fragments of the puzzle. Thorne believed he could tap into the ether, theoretical medium once thought to carry light and electromagnetic waves, Holmes explained. His device creates a resonance that amplifies these effects, producing phenomena that appear supernatural, but are, in fact, grounded in physics. Watson, still clutching the metallic disc, shook his head. But why hide all this? Why the secrecy, the codes, fear, perhaps, Holmes said, or ambition? Thorne's work could revolutionize science or destroy it, if misused. Someone in this manner knows more than they've let on, and we must find them before the device is activated again. As if on cue, the hum in the laboratory reached a deafening pitch. The cylindrical device glowed brighter, its patterns pulsing like a heartbeat. Watson stepped back, his hand on his revolver, but Holmes moved toward the device, his eyes blazing with determination. "Stay back, Watson," he said. "If this is a test, we shall meet it with reason." The glow intensified, and for a moment, the laboratory seemed to dissolve around them, replaced by a vision of another time, a laboratory identical to this one, with Dr. Thorne at its center, his hands on the device as it sparked and hummed. The vision faded, but the hum remained, vibrating through the floor, the walls, the very air. Holmes turned to Watson, his voice steady, despite the chaos. "We are close, Watson. The truth lies within this device and within the manor's secrets. Tomorrow, we confront the suspects. For now, we guard this laboratory. No one must touch this machine until we understand its full power." Watson nodded, his resolve hardening. The night stretched on, filled with the hum of the unknown, but, with Holmes at his side, he felt a flicker of hope that reason would prevail even in the face of the impossible. Chapter 7. Midnight Pursuit. The night hung heavy over Thorne Manor, a shroud of fog weaving through the estate's sprawling grounds. The air was thick, damp, and cold, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and pine. Sherlock Holmes stood at the edge of the manor's west wing, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness beyond the faint glow of the gas lamps that flickered along the gravel path. Beside him, Dr. John Watson shivered slightly, pulling his coat tighter against the chill. The eerie silence of the night was broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves stirred by an unseen breeze. "Holmes," Watson whispered, his breath visible in the cool air, "do you really think our quarry will make a move tonight? The fog's so thick, I can barely see my own boots." Holmes' lips curved into a faint, determined smile. "Precisely why tonight is ideal, Watson. The fog is a cloak for the cautious, and a trap for the unwary. Our shadowy figure, whom I suspect has been watching us as closely as we've been watching them, will not resist the opportunity to act under such cover." The events of the past days had set Holmes' mind ablaze with possibilities. The cryptic letter from Dr. Elias Thorne, the inexplicable movements of objects in the manor, the glowing apparitions in the laboratory blackout, and the disappearance of the prototype device from a locked room all pointed to a carefully orchestrated deception. Yet, the who and the why remained elusive, like a half-remembered dream. Holmes had spent the evening poring over Thorne's coded journals, deciphering fragments that hinted at experiments with electromagnetic fields and quantum anomalies. But it was the fleeting glimpse of a cloaked figure slipping into the gardens the previous night that had convinced him to lie in wait tonight. He had positioned himself and Watson near the manor's rear entrance, a spot offering a clear view of the grounds, while remaining obscured by a cluster of ancient yews. The plan was simple: observe, pursue, and uncover. Holmes' instincts told him that the figure was no mere trespasser, but someone intimately connected to the manor's mistress, a conspirator, perhaps, or even the mastermind behind the vanishing artifact. The hours ticked by, marked only by the distant chime of the manor's grandfather clock, its mournful tolls muffled by the fog. Watson shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on the revolver tucked into his coat pocket. "Holmes, my legs are turning to stone. If we're to chase anyone, I hope they show themselves soon." "Patience, Watson," Holmes murmured, his eyes never leaving the shadowed expanse. "The night is young, and our quarry is cautious. They will move when they believe themselves unseen." As if in answer to his words, a faint sound broke the stillness, a soft crunch of gravel, barely audible, from the direction of the rose garden. Holmes' posture stiffened, his senses sharpening like a blade. He raised a hand, signaling Watson to remain silent. The crunch came again, deliberate and measured, followed by the faint rustle of fabric. Someone was moving through the fog, their steps cautious, but purposeful. Holmes whispered, pointing toward a faint silhouette emerging from the mist. The figure was cloaked, their face obscured by a hood, moving with the stealth of a predator. They skirted the edge of the rose garden, heading toward the old stone wall that marked the boundary of the estate's formal grounds. Holmes motioned for Watson to follow, and the two men slipped into the fog, their footsteps muffled by the damp grass. The chase was on, but it required precision. One misstep could alert their quarry. Holmes moved like a wraith, his long coat blending into the mist, while Watson struggled to match his silent stride. The figure ahead paused briefly, as if sensing pursuit, then quickened their pace, veering toward a copse of trees that bordered a narrow stream. The fog thickened as they approached the trees, reducing visibility to mere feet. Holmes' eyes, trained to discern patterns in chaos, tracked the faint impressions of footsteps in the soft earth. The figure was heading somewhere specific, somewhere hidden. Holmes' mind raced, recalling the manor's layout from the architectural plans he'd studied earlier. Beyond the copse lay a disused section of the estate, where an old groundskeeper's cottage stood, half ruined and overgrown. It was a perfect hiding place or a staging ground for something more sinister. Holmes, Watson hissed, gripping his arm. Look there, by the stream. The figure had stopped near a gnarled willow, its branches drooping into the water. They knelt, their hands moving quickly, as if searching for something beneath the roots. Holmes crept closer, using the trees for cover, his heart pounding not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. The figure retrieved a small object, a metal box, glinting faintly in the moonlight that pierced the fog before rising and hurrying toward the cottage. Holmes signaled Watson to circle around, cutting off any escape route. The doctor nodded, his face set with determination, and moved silently to the right, disappearing into the mist. Holmes advanced directly, his eyes locked on the figure. As he neared the cottage, he noticed something peculiar. The ground beneath his feet felt uneven, not like the soft earth of the gardens, but harder, as if paved with stone long buried. The figure reached the cottage door, a rotting wooden slab, hanging on rusted hinges. They pushed it open and slipped inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. Holmes paused, listening. No sound came from within, no footsteps, no rustling. It was as if the figure had vanished. He approached the door, his hand hovering over the handle, when a low, mechanical hum reached his ears, faint but unmistakable. "Watson," Holmes called softly, hoping his friend was in position. No response came, but he trusted Watson's instincts. He pushed the door open, stepping into the darkness of the cottage. The air inside was musty, thick with the smell of mold and decay. His eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through a cracked window, revealing a cluttered interior, broken furniture, cobwebs, and a trapdoor in the floor, partially open. The hum grew louder, emanating from below. Holmes knelt beside the trapdoor, peering into the darkness. A faint glow flickered, suggesting a light source deep within. He deduced it was no ordinary cellar, but part of a larger network, perhaps a tunnel system hidden beneath the manor for decades, possibly centuries. The implications were staggering. A secret passage could explain the locked-room mystery of the vanished prototype. The apparitions, even the figure's ability to move undetected. Holmes descended the narrow stone steps, his hand brushing against damp walls. The hum intensified, vibrating through the stone, and the glow grew brighter, casting eerie shadows. At the bottom, he found himself in a tunnel, its walls lined with ancient bricks, some crumbling under the weight of time. The tunnel stretched in two directions, one leading back toward the manor, the other toward the unknown. He chose the path toward the manor, following the glow. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder and heavier. After several minutes, he reached a wider chamber. its walls studded with rusted metal pipes and strange, jury-rigged machinery. In the center stood a table, and on it, the metal box the figure had retrieved. Beside it lay a collection of tools, wires, and a notebook filled with diagrams Thorne's work, or a copy of it. Holmes' eyes darted to the shadows as a noise echoed behind him, a soft scrape, like a boot on stone. He turned, but no one was there. The fog must have followed him underground, he thought, or his senses were playing tricks. He opened the notebook, scanning its contents, sketches of electromagnetic coils, equations for manipulating light, and references to a quantum lens. This was no mere invention. It was a device capable of bending reality itself, if Thorne's theories held true. A sudden crash broke his focus. The trapdoor above slammed shut, plunging the chamber into near darkness, save for the faint glow of the machinery. Holmes' pulse quickened, but his mind remained calm. He was not alone. The figure had doubled back, or another conspirator was at play. He moved silently toward the tunnel's exit, his hand on the small knife he kept concealed in his coat. Holmes. Watson's voice echoed from above, muffled but urgent. The door, it's locked. Stay there, Watson, Holmes called back, his voice steady. Find a way to open it, but do not follow until I signal. He crept forward, his senses attuned to every sound. The hum of the machinery grew erratic, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, from the shadows, a figure lunged, a cloaked silhouette, wielding a heavy wrench. Holmes dodged, the wrench grazing his shoulder, and countered with a swift jab, knocking the weapon away. The figure stumbled, but recovered, vanishing into the tunnel's depths. Holmes gave chase, his long legs carrying him through the twisting passages. The glow faded, replaced by darkness, but he relied on sound and instinct, tracking the figure's footsteps. The tunnel branched again, and he chose the path leading upward, sensing it would return to the manor. The air grew warmer, the walls smoother, as if this section had been recently maintained. He emerged into another chamber, this one beneath the manor's west wing, judging by the architecture. The figure was there, kneeling before a panel of blinking lights and wires, a control station of sorts. Holmes recognized the setup. It resembled Thorne's laboratory equipment, but modified, perhaps to amplify its effects. The figure turned, their hood falling back, revealing a face Holmes had seen before, one of Thorne's assistants. A young man named Victor Hale. Hale, Holmes said, his voice cutting through the hum. What is the meaning of this? What have you done? Chapter 8. The Illusion of Levitation. The night air at Thorne Manor was thick with tension, the kind that clung to the skin like damp fog. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stood in the shadowed corridor just outside the grand dining hall, where the household had gathered for a strained supper. The flickering gas lamps cast long, wavering shadows on the walls, their light barely piercing the gloom of the ancient estate. Holmes's sharp eyes darted toward every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the heavy curtains, as if the house itself were conspiring to conceal its secrets. Watson, ever the steady presence, clutched his notebook, his pen poised to capture the details of what had become an increasingly perplexing case. Earlier that evening, the inexplicable had struck again. During the meal, a young servant named Eliza, a quiet girl with wide, nervous eyes, had risen from her seat to clear a tray of dishes. As she crossed the room, her feet appeared to lift from the ground, her body hovering inches above the polished oak floor. The room had fallen silent, save for a collective gasp from the assembled guests: Dr. Elias Thorne, his assistants, his estranged niece Clara, and the dour housekeeper, Mrs. Grimsby. Eliza's face had contorted in terror as she drifted forward, her arms flailing as if trying to grasp something solid. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, she dropped to the floor, trembling, her tray clattering beside her. The incident had lasted mere seconds, but it was enough to send a ripple of fear through the manor. Holmes had observed the scene with his characteristic detachment, his mind already dissecting the event, while others whispered of ghosts and curses. Watson, though shaken, had noted the precise details, the angle of Eliza's body, the faint shimmer in the air around her, and the peculiar absence of any sound save her own stifled cry. Now, as they stood in the corridor, Holmes's voice was low and measured, cutting through the oppressive silence. "An illusion, Watson," he said, his tone clipped. "A clever one, but an illusion nonetheless. The question is not whether it was staged, but how and why." Watson frowned, his brow furrowing as he glanced toward the dining hall, where the others remained, their voices a muted hum through the heavy oak door. "Holmes, I saw it with my own eyes. She was floating. No wires, no pulleys, no visible means of support. Surely you don't mean to suggest this was some parlor trick?" Holmes's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles, though his eyes remained cold and analytical. "What the eye sees, Watson, is not always what the mind should trust. The human senses are fallible, easily manipulated by those who understand their weaknesses. Come, we must examine the scene before the trail grows cold." They returned to the dining hall, where the guests had dispersed, leaving only Dr. Thorne and Clara lingering near the fireplace. Thorne, his thin frame hunched, and his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, looked up as Holmes entered. "Mr. Holmes, have you an explanation for this madness?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and desperation. "My work, my life's work depends on rationality, yet I find myself questioning everything." Clara, standing beside him, crossed her arms, her expression a mask of skepticism. "It's this house," she said sharply. "It's cursed. My uncle's experiments have stirred something unnatural. You'd do well to leave before it claims us all." Holmes ignored her theatrics, his attention fixed on the spot where Eliza had levitated. The dining hall was a cavernous room, its high ceiling adorned with ornate plasterwork, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Thorne ancestors. A massive chandelier hung above the long mahogany table, its crystals glinting faintly in the dim light. The floor, polished to a mirror-like sheen, bore no visible marks, no scratches, no scaves, nothing to suggest mechanical interference. Holmes knelt, his magnifying glass in hand, inspecting the floorboards with meticulous care. "Watson, observe the grain of the wood here. Perfectly smooth, undisturbed, no evidence of trapdoors or hidden panels." He rose, his gaze sweeping upward to the chandelier. And yet, something lifted that girl, something tangible, yet invisible. To the untrained eye, Watson followed Holmes's line of sight, his mind racing. "You suspect mirrors, don't you? Or some kind of optical trickery?" "Mirrors are a possibility," Holmes replied, pacing slowly around the table. "A well-placed reflection can create the illusion of absence or presence. But mirrors alone could not account for the physicality of the event." Eliza's body moved forward, not merely upward. That suggests a force, mechanical or otherwise. Thorne, who had been listening intently, interjected. "My research involves electromagnetic fields, Mr. Holmes. Could such a force be manipulated to create this effect? I've theorized about localized distortions, but I've never achieved anything so dramatic." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Your research, Dr. Thorne, is the key to this puzzle. The journals we found in your laboratory suggest you've been experimenting with quantum anomalies, manipulations of light, gravity, perhaps even space-time itself. If someone has taken your work further, or perverted it for their own ends, we may be dealing with a technology far beyond the ordinary." Watson, ever practical, shook his head. "But Holmes, even if such a device exists, how could it be deployed? Here, in this room, without anyone noticing? The chandelier, the walls, the floor, there's nowhere to hide a machine of that complexity." Holmes paused, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Nowhere visible, Watson. But consider this. The manor is old, its foundations riddled with secrets. The tunnel we discovered last night suggests a network of hidden passages. If a device were concealed within the walls or beneath the floor, it could be operated remotely, its effects masked by the chaos of the moment. Clara snorted, her voice dripping with disdain. You're grasping at straws, Mr. Holmes. Tunnels and machines. Next you'll say the ghosts of my ancestors are pulling strings from beyond the grave. Holmes turned to her, his gaze piercing. Miss Thorne, your skepticism is noted, but your uncle's work has attracted dangerous attention. Someone in this house or beyond, it has both the means and the motive to stage these phenomena. I suggest you consider who stands to gain from discrediting Dr. Thorne's research. Clara's face paled slightly, but she held his gaze, her jaw set. Thorne, meanwhile, seemed to shrink further into himself, his hands trembling as he clutched the armrest of his chair. I never meant for this, he murmured. My work was meant to advance human understanding, not sow chaos. Holmes's expression softened, if only for a moment. Your intentions are irrelevant, Dr. Thorne. The question is, what has been done with your discoveries? Watson, we must inspect the chandelier and the walls. If there is a mechanism, it will leave traces, however faint. They set to work, Holmes climbing onto the table to examine the chandelier, while Watson tapped along the walls, listening for hollow spaces. The chandelier, a labyrinth of crystal and brass, offered no obvious clues, no hidden wires, no unusual attachments. Yet Holmes lingered, his fingers tracing the intricate metalwork. Curious, he muttered. The alignment of these crystals is precise, almost too precise. They could be arranged to focus light in a specific pattern. Watson, meanwhile, found nothing in the walls but solid stone and plaster. Frustrated, he turned to Holmes. If there's no mechanism here, what are we left with? You can't seriously believe this was supernatural. Holmes descended from the table, his movements graceful, despite the tension in the room. Supernatural, no. Scientific, yes, though the science may be beyond our current understanding. Let us consider the servant, Elisa. Her reaction was genuine fear, not the calculated performance of an accomplice. She is a pawn in this game, Watson, but a pawn can still reveal the player's hand. They sought out Eliza, finding her in the servants' quarters, a cramped attic room lit by a single candle. She sat on a narrow cot, her hands clasped tightly. In her lap, her eyes red from crying. Mrs. Grimsby stood nearby, her stern face softened by concern. She's been like this since it happened, the housekeeper said. Poor girl's terrified. Holmes knelt before Eliza, his voice gentle, but firm. Miss Eliza, I need you to recount exactly what you felt during the incident. Every sensation, no matter how small. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. It was like I was being pulled upward, sir. My feet left the floor, and I couldn't control it. There was a tingling all over my skin, like pins and needles. In the air it shimmered, like heat off a road in summer. Holmes nodded, his mind clearly racing. And before you rose, did you notice anything unusual? A sound, a smell, a change in the light? She hesitated, her brow furrowing. There was a hum, sir. Low, like a machine, but it stopped as soon as I fell. Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes. A hum, he said. That could indicate some kind of electrical device. Indeed, Holmes replied, rising to his feet. Thank you, Eliza. You've been most helpful. He turned to Watson, his voice dropping to a whisper. A low-frequency hum suggests an electromagnetic field, possibly generated by a device hidden nearby. We must search the adjacent rooms and the grounds outside. The dining hall. Chapter 8. The Illusion of Levitation. The night air at Thorne Manor was thick with tension, the kind that clung to the skin like damp fog. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stood in the shadowed corridor, just outside the grand dining hall, where the household had gathered for a strange supper. The flickering gas lamps cast long, wavering shadows on the walls, their light barely piercing the gloom of the ancient estate. Holmes's sharp eyes darted toward every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the heavy curtains, as if the house itself were conspiring to conceal its secrets. Watson, ever the steady presence, clutched his notebook, his pen poised to capture the details of what had become an increasingly perplexing case. Earlier that evening, the inexplicable had struck again. During the meal, a young servant named Eliza, a quiet girl with wide, nervous eyes, had risen from her seat to clear a tray of dishes. As she crossed the room, her feet appeared to lift from the ground, her body hovering inches above the polished oak floor. The room had fallen silent, save for a collective gasp from the assembled guest, Dr. Elias Thorne, his assistants, his estranged niece, Clara, and the door housekeeper, Mrs. Grimsby. Eliza's face had contorted in terror as she drifted forward, her arms flailing as if trying to grasp something solid. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, she dropped to the floor, trembling, her tray clattering beside her. The incident had lasted mere seconds, but it was enough to send a ripple of fear through the manor. Holmes had observed the scene with his characteristic detachment, his mind already dissecting the event, while others whispered of ghosts and curses. Watson, though shaken, had noted the precise details, the angle of Eliza's body, the faint shimmer in the air around her, and the peculiar absence of any sound save her own stifled cry. Now, as they stood in the corridor, Holmes's voice was low and measured, cutting through the oppressive silence. "An illusion, Watson," he said, his tone clipped. "A clever one, but an illusion nonetheless. The question is not whether it was staged, but how and why." Watson frowned, his brow furrowing as he glanced toward the dining hall, where the others remained, their voices a muted hum through the heavy oak door. "Holmes, I saw it with my own eyes. She was floating. No wires, no pulleys, no visible means of support. Surely you don't mean to suggest this was some parlor trick?" Holmes's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles, though his eyes remained cold and analytical. "What the eye sees, Watson, is not always what the mind should trust. The human senses are fallible, easily manipulated by those who understand their weaknesses. Come, we must examine the scene before the trail grows cold." They returned to the dining hall, where the guests had dispersed, leaving only Dr. Thorne and Clara lingering near the fireplace. Thorne, his thin frame hunched and his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, looked up as Holmes entered. "Mr. Holmes, have you an explanation for this madness?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and desperation. "My life's work depends on rationality, yet I find myself questioning everything." Clara, standing beside him, crossed her arms, her expression a mask of skepticism. "It's this house," she said sharply. "It's cursed. My uncle's experiments have stirred something unnatural. You'd do well to leave before it claims us all." Holmes ignored her theatrics, his attention fixed on the spot where Eliza had levitated. The dining hall was a cavernous room, its high ceiling adorned with ornate plasterwork, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Thorne ancestors. A massive chandelier hung above the long mahogany table, its crystals glinting faintly in the dim light. The floor, polished to a mirror-like sheen, bore no visible marks, no scratches, no scuffs, nothing to suggest mechanical interference. Holmes knelt, his magnifying glass in hand, inspecting the floorboards with meticulous care. "Watson, observe the grain of the wood here. Perfectly smooth, undisturbed, no evidence of trapdoors or hidden panels." He rose, his gaze sweeping upward to the chandelier. "And yet, something lifted that girl. Something tangible, yet invisible to the untrained eye." Watson followed Holmes's line of sight, his mind racing. "You suspect mirrors, don't you? Or some kind of optical trickery?" "Mirrors are a possibility," Holmes replied, pacing slowly around the table. A well-placed reflection can create the illusion of absence or presence, but mirrors alone could not account for the physicality of the event. Eliza's body moved forward, not merely upward. That suggests a force, mechanical or otherwise. Thorne, who had been listening intently, interjected, "My research involves electromagnetic fields, Mr. Holmes. Could such a force be manipulated to create this effect? I've theorized about localized distortions, but I've never achieved anything so dramatic." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Your research, Dr. Thorne, is the key to this puzzle. The journals we found in your laboratory suggest you've been experimenting with quantum anomalies, manipulations of light, gravity, perhaps even space-time itself. If someone has taken your work further, or perverted it for their own ends, we may be dealing with a technology far beyond the ordinary." Watson, ever practical, shook his head. "But Holmes, even if such a device exists, how could it be deployed, here, in this room, without anyone noticing? The chandelier, the walls, the floor, there's nowhere to hide a machine of that complexity." Holmes paused, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Nowhere visible, Watson. But consider this. The manor is old, its foundations riddled with secrets. The tunnel we discovered last night suggests a network of hidden passages. If a device were concealed within the walls or beneath the floor, it could be operated remotely, its effects masked by the chaos of the moment." Clara snorted, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're grasping at straws, Mr. Holmes. Tunnels and machines. Next you'll say, the ghosts of my ancestors are pulling strings from beyond the grave." Holmes turned to her, his gaze piercing. "Miss Thorne, your skepticism is noted, but your uncle's work has attracted dangerous attention. Someone in this house or beyond, it has both the means and the motive to stage these phenomena. I suggest you consider who stands to gain from discrediting Dr. Thorne's research." Clara's face paled slightly, but she held his gaze, her jaw set. Thorne, meanwhile, seemed to shrink further into himself, his hands trembling as he clutched the armrest of his chair. "I never meant for this," he murmured. "My work was meant to advance human understanding, not sow chaos." Holmes's expression softened, if only for a moment. "Your intentions are irrelevant, Dr. Thorne. The question is what has been done with your discoveries, Watson. We must inspect the chandelier and the walls. If there is a mechanism, it will leave traces, however faint." They set to work, Holmes climbing onto the table to examine the chandelier, while Watson tapped along the walls, listening for hollow spaces. The chandelier, a labyrinth of crystal and brass, offered no obvious clues, no hidden wires, no unusual attachments. Yet Holmes lingered, his fingers tracing the intricate metalwork. "Curious," he muttered. "The alignment of these crystals is precise, almost too precise. They could be arranged to focus light in a specific pattern." Watson, meanwhile, found nothing in the walls but solid stone and plaster. Frustrated, he turned to Holmes. "If there's no mechanism here, what are we left with? You can't seriously believe this was supernatural." Holmes descended from the table, his movements graceful, despite the tension in the room. "Supernatural, no. Scientific, yes, though the science may be beyond our current understanding. Let us consider the servant, Eliza." Her reaction was genuine fear, not the calculated performance of an accomplice. "She is a pawn in this game, Watson, but a pawn can still reveal the player's hand." They sought out Eliza, finding her in the servants' quarters, a cramped attic room lit by a single candle. She sat on a narrow cot, her hands clasped tightly. In her lap, her eyes red from crying. Mrs. Grimsby stood nearby, her stern face softened by concern. "She's been like this since it happened," the housekeeper said. "Poor girls, terrified." Holmes knelt before Eliza, his voice gentle, but firm. "Miss Elisa, I need you to recount exactly what you felt during the incident. Every sensation, no matter how small. Elisa's voice was barely a whisper. It was like I was being pulled upward, sir. My feet left the floor, and I couldn't control it. There was a tingling all over my skin, like pins and needles, and the air it shimmered like heat off a road in summer. Holmes nodded, his mind clearly racing. And before you rose, did you notice anything unusual? A sound? A smell? A change in the light? She hesitated, her brow furrowing. There was a hum, sir, low, like a machine, but it stopped as soon as I fell. Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes. A hum, he said. That could indicate some kind of electrical device. Indeed, Holmes replied, rising to his feet. Thank you, Elisa. You've been most helpful. He turned to Watson, his voice dropping to a whisper. A low-frequency hum suggests an electromagnetic field, possibly generated by a device hidden nearby. We must search the adjacent rooms and the grounds outside the dining hall. They spent the next hour combing the manor, their search taking them to the library, the conservatory, and the narrow service corridors that flanked the dining hall. In the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with wilting plants, Holmes paused near a heavy iron grate set into the floor. Watson, look here. This grate is loose, and the air beneath it is cooler than it should be. With effort, they lifted the grate, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. A faint hum, almost imperceptible, emanated from below. Holmes's eyes gleamed with excitement. This, Watson, is no ordinary ventilation system. It's a conduit possibly, for wiring or even a concealed mechanism. They lacked the tools to explore the shaft immediately, but Holmes marked its location, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. Someone has gone to great lengths to create the illusion of the impossible, he said. Mirrors, wires, electromagnetic fields, all orchestrated to make us question reality itself. But every illusion has a foundation, and we are close to finding it. As they returned to the dining hall, the storm that had been brewing all evening broke, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance. The atmosphere in the manor grew heavier, the shadows deeper, as if the house itself were bracing for the truth to be uncovered. Holmes stood at the center of the room, his silhouette framed by the flickering light of the chandelier. Watson, he said, his voice low and resolute, we are dealing with a mind as cunning as it is ruthless. The levitation was no mere trick, it was a demonstration, a message. Someone wants Dr. Thorne's work discredited, or worse, stolen. We must be vigilant, for the next move will be bolder and far more dangerous. Watson nodded, his hand instinctively resting on the revolver in his coat pocket. What's our next step, Holmes? We recreate the event, Holmes replied, his eyes glinting with determination. We stage a scene, control the variables, and force the culprit to reveal their hand. Tomorrow night, we dine again and, this time, we set the trap. The night passed uneasily, with Holmes and Watson taking turns keeping watch. The manor seemed to pulse with secrets, its creaks and groans a constant reminder of the mysteries yet to be unraveled. By morning, Holmes had devised a plan, one that would require precision, timing, and a touch of theatrics to match the deception they faced. The following evening, the dining hall was prepared exactly as it had been the night before. The same guests were seated, the same tension hung in the air. Eliza, though reluctant, agreed to participate, her fear tempered by Holmes's assurance that no harm would come to her. As the meal progressed, Holmes watched every detail, the flicker of the candles, the reflections in the chandelier, the subtle movements of the guests. At the precise moment when Eliza rose to clear the dishes, Holmes gave a discreet signal. Watson, stationed near the conservatory, activated a small device. Holmes had rigged a simple electromagnet, concealed in his pocket, designed to emit a low hum similar to the one Eliza had described. The effect was immediate. The guests turned, their eyes fixed on Eliza, who began to tremble, as if anticipating another levitation. But this time, nothing happened. The air did not shimmer, the girl did not rise. Instead, Holmes stood, his voice cutting through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have been deceived not by ghosts, but by science misused. The levitation you witnessed was no miracle, but a carefully orchestrated illusion, reliant on hidden mechanisms and human gullibility." He gestured toward the chandelier. "The crystals above us are not mere decoration. They are aligned to focus light, creating a holographic effect when combined with a hidden projector." The hum Eliza heard came from an electromagnetic coil, likely concealed in the shaft we discovered, and the movement, a system of fine wires, so thin as to be nearly invisible, manipulated from a concealed vantage point. The guests erupted in murmurs, some indignant, others disbelieving. Clara stood, her face flushed with anger. "This is preposterous. You accuse us of conspiracy without proof." Holmes's smile was cold. "Proof, Miss Thorne. I have it. Watson, the great." Watson moved swiftly to the conservatory, lifting the iron grate to reveal a bundle of wires and a small humming device nestled in the shaft. The room fell silent, the evidence undeniable. Thorne's face was a mask of shock, while Clara's defiance crumbled into silence. "The question remains," Holmes continued, "who orchestrated this, and why? The answer lies not in the supernatural, but in the alto-human motives of greed, envy, and betrayal. We are close, Watson, very close to unmasking the deceiver." As the storm raged outside, Holmes's words hung in the air, a challenge to the unseen mastermind. The game was far from over, but the pieces were falling into place, and Sherlock Holmes was determined to see it through to the end.